It started with a card. One of those cheap ones you find in the clearance bin at a gas station, probably meant as a joke between coworkers or something you'd give ironically to a roommate who failed an exam. But this one wasn't from a stranger or a classmate. It was from my family. My name's Mason, I'm 24, and I haven't celebrated my birthday with them since. The card read, in bold Comic Sans with a cartoon of a sad clown holding a deflated balloon, "At least you tried." Inside, in my dad's handwriting, blocky and slightly crooked, he'd written, "You gave it a shot, kiddo." Then, under that, in various pens, my mom, my sister Jenna, and my younger brother Liam all signed their names like it was some big joke. A family project. I remember reading it while standing in our living room, surrounded by the forced decorations they had lazily put up that morning. One limp banner that read Happy B-Day, and a few streamers drooping sadly from the ceiling fan, like they'd given up halfway through. There was no cake, just an empty stand with candles sticking out of it like a taunt. And the worst part? The laughter. That sharp, familiar laughter that always started with Jenna, like she was the cue card in a sitcom audience. Then Liam joined in, then Mom. Dad chuckled too, but his was more of a low grunt, like he wasn't really in it, but didn't want to be left out. I stood there, holding the card in one hand, candles flickering on a ghost cake in front of me, their light catching in my eyes while Jenna lifted her phone and said, "Smile, Mason. Say minimum wage." That got another round of laughs. I smiled. I posed. I played along. Because that's what I always did. I've always been the one in the background. The gentle one, as Mom liked to say. The emotional support son. Never the golden child. That was Jenna, who got straight A's and a full scholarship to college. Never the prodigy. That was Liam, the soccer star who'd already been scouted for regional teams by age 16. I was the kid who dropped out of community college after 2 semesters, tried to start a screen printing business that failed within a year, and now worked at a used bookstore that barely kept the lights on. I wasn't bitter. Not at first. I accepted my role. Every family has one, right? The one they tease, the one they poke fun at because he can take a joke. But something about that birthday hit different. Maybe it was the way Mom didn't even pretend to act like it was a surprise this year. Maybe it was the way Liam kept glancing at his phone during the party, probably texting his girlfriend about how dumb it all was. Or maybe it was how Jenna, who had recently landed a job at a law firm downtown, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Maybe next year you'll actually have something to celebrate." I didn't even respond. Just blew out the candles, on air. Literally nothing on the stand. Not even a cupcake. Jenna clapped sarcastically. Dad said, "Make a wish, sport." Like that wasn't the saddest joke of all. I went through the motions, as usual. Took the photo. Held up the card. Pretended it was all fine. But inside, something snapped. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, that was the exact moment I started packing up, mentally. Not just from the party. From the family dynamic that I'd accepted for far too long. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else and sat in my car for almost an hour with the keys in my hand. It was my old Corolla, the one I'd bought with my own money 3 years ago. The AC barely worked. The upholstery smelled faintly of coffee and pine air freshener, and the left speaker crackled like firewood. But it was mine. Every dollar, every mile, every scratched bumper was mine. That meant something. Maybe more than it should have. I didn't leave right then, but the idea had taken root. I started watching them more closely over the next few days. Listening. Observing. The way Mom would change the subject when I talked about trying to write again. How Liam laughed when I said I was thinking of maybe going back to school. How Jenna rolled her eyes when I said I wanted to try painting again. Just a hobby, something creative. They didn't say no. They didn't have to. Their faces did all the talking. That quiet smirk of doubt. That performative patience like I was a child trying to explain why the sky was purple. It wasn't always like this. I mean, growing up, we weren't exactly the Brady Bunch, but there were good moments. Dad teaching me how to change a tire. Mom bringing me soup when I had strep. Jenna helping me make a PowerPoint in high school. Liam giving me one of his old hoodies when mine got ruined in the rain. But somewhere along the way, that warmth turned into something colder, more transactional. If you weren't winning, achieving, performing, you were background noise. Still, I stayed. I told myself I had to. Rent was insane, and I didn't want to burden my friend Alex again. He'd already let me crash on his couch for 2 months last year. Plus, there was a small part of me that still wanted their approval, like a dog chasing after a car it knows it'll never catch. 2 weeks passed. I smiled through dinners, nodded during small talk. I played my role like a pro. But each night, I spent hours scrolling apartments in nearby cities, researching part-time jobs, looking up night classes. I even pulled out an old sketchbook and started doodling again. Nothing fancy, just charcoal lines, the way I used to. Something about putting marks on paper grounded me. Reminded me I was real, not just a prop in their sitcom. Then came the turning point. It was a Sunday. Jenna had come over for brunch. She didn't live with us anymore, obviously. She had a downtown condo with modern lighting and a doorman who knew her by name. She brought her new boyfriend, Nick, a guy with sleeve tattoos and that confident smirk of someone who'd never been told no in his life. We all sat at the table, Mom making her famous blueberry pancakes, Dad grumbling about syrup brands, Liam on his phone as usual. Somehow, the topic turned to me. Jenna had asked casually, "So, Mason, what are you doing these days?" Not mean, not sharp, just casual. But I knew that tone. It was bait. The same tone you'd use when asking a toddler what they want to be when they grow up. I replied evenly, "Still working at the bookstore. Might take some online courses." Nick snorted. "That sounds fun." Jenna tilted her head, mock curiosity painted on her face. "What kind of courses?" "Graphic design, maybe. Something creative," I said, already regretting it. "Graphic design?" Liam chimed in, finally looking up. "Isn't that like making logos and stuff?" I nodded. "Among other things." Dad chuckled. "Didn't you try that already with those t-shirts?" "They were screen-printed designs," I corrected. Nick leaned back, arms crossed. "Yeah, but those didn't sell, right?" Mom tried to change the subject, bless her, but it was too late. The jabs had started. "Jenna, maybe just get something stable, you know? Like an admin job or something. No shame in that." Liam, "Yeah, like filing papers or answering phones. You'd probably be good at that." I swallowed hard. Smiled. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." Nick grinned. "Hey, at least you tried, right?" And that was it. That stupid phrase again. That card. That joke. That moment they all thought was harmless and hilarious. I stood up. Not abruptly. Not angrily. Just calmly. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed my keys, and walked right out the front door. No speech. No scene. No drama. Just gone. I stayed with Alex that night. And the next. Told him everything. He didn't say much. Just handed me a spare blanket and said, "Took you long enough." That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't spoken to my parents since. I haven't replied to Liam's texts. Haven't liked any of Jenna's Instagram posts. I've been quiet. Planning. Watching. Then, this morning, I got a message. Just one line. From Liam. "Mom's been crying every night. Just come back." I stared at it for a long time. And then, I smiled. I didn't respond to Liam's message. I left it on read. Maybe that sounds cold, but after everything, I wasn't ready to be guilt-tripped back into my role as the family punchline. I'd spent years accepting scraps of affection wrapped in passive-aggressive jokes, thinking it was love just delivered badly. But the moment I walked out of that house, something shifted. And not just in them, because apparently, me leaving threw the entire family into some melodramatic tailspin, but in me. I started seeing it all differently. Every offhand comment, every joke, every side. Jenna threw me across the dinner table. And suddenly, it didn't feel like teasing anymore. It felt like cruelty with a smile. Alex let me stay in his guest room. Well, technically, it was a storage room with a futon and a tower of shoeboxes, but it was warm, quiet, and mine. No sarcasm. No judgment. Just space to think. The first week was peaceful. I helped Alex out with some side work. He did freelance photography and needed help organizing a massive backlog of files. It was tedious, but oddly satisfying. I cooked dinner a few nights. Got back into sketching. Found myself sleeping deeper than I had in years. I didn't miss home. Not one bit. But my phone kept buzzing. Mostly from Liam. A few messages from Mom. Short ones like, "We miss you," or "Hope you're okay." But not a single call. Not one voice that said, "We're sorry." And that told me everything. Then Jenna messaged. It was a voice note, of course. She always preferred those. Easier to perform when you couldn't be interrupted. "Hey," she said, her voice all business. "So, I talked to Mom. She's a wreck. She's been crying. She didn't mean for the birthday thing to be, like, mean. It was supposed to be funny. Mason, you've always had a sense of humor. You're being kind of dramatic about this. Just come home, okay? You're making it way bigger than it needs to be. I listened to it twice and laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was textbook. No apology, no accountability, just a firm reminder that if I had a problem with how I was treated, I was the problem. That was always Jenna's specialty. She could stab you with a smile and then hand you a towel to clean up your own blood. I didn't reply, but I watched their moves. Jenna posted a photo later that day, her and Nick at some rooftop bar, captioned, "Family first." Liam posted a clip from his soccer practice with the song Stronger playing over it, like he was the protagonist in a Nike commercial. And Mom, she posted an old family photo, one of those perfectly framed moments from a vacation we took to Colorado when I was 15. All of us standing in front of a mountain, arm in arm. The caption just said, "Miss these days." And I wasn't in the photo. I remembered that trip vividly. I was the one taking the picture. The next few days were oddly quiet. I thought maybe they'd finally given up. But then, Friday hit. I was in the middle of helping Alex sort through gear when my phone rang. Not a message. An actual call. "Dad." I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen for a full 10 seconds before I finally answered. "Hey," I said flatly. There was a pause. Then, "Hey, kiddo." His voice was gravelly, like he'd been smoking again. "You good?" "I'm fine. Your mom's been worried. She has a phone. She says you won't answer." I didn't reply. He sighed. "Look, I know the birthday thing. Maybe it went too far. Your mom told me about the card." I waited. I didn't mean for it to be hurtful. I don't know. We were joking around. We didn't think you'd take it so seriously. Another pause. He was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. "Anyway," he continued, "Jenna's got something going on next week. Big deal at the firm. She wanted the family there. Said it'd mean a lot if you showed up." There it was. It wasn't about me. It never was. They didn't want me back. They wanted the image of me back. For a photo. For appearances. "I've got work," I said. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure." Dad was quiet for a second, then said, "All right. Let me know if you change your mind." And that was it. A few days later, Alex and I were out at a coffee shop when I saw it. Jenna's big event. It was all over her Instagram. The firm's annual gala. Black tie, city skyline in the background. Everyone in tailored suits and champagne dresses. Jenna stood at the center, flanked by Mom and Dad, smiling like the queen of the world. Liam stood behind them, awkward in a blazer that didn't quite fit. And there, in the corner of the photo, was me. Or at least, someone pretending to be me. They had asked Alex once before to pose for something years back, when they needed family photos for a Christmas card, and I'd missed the shoot because I was working overtime at the bookstore. He'd laughed about it then, joking that my family was weird. But this time, they hadn't asked him. This time, it wasn't even him. It was Nick, Jenna's boyfriend, in a gray suit, standing just close enough to look like part of the family. They replaced me. I stared at the photo for a long time. My stomach dropped in this slow, cold way, like stepping into a lake in October. Alex leaned over, saw the look on my face, and asked, "What happened?" I showed him the post. He blinked. "That's Nick, right?" "Yeah. They put Nick in your spot." I nodded. Alex exhaled slowly. "That's messed up." "No. It was calculated. Because I knew Jenna. I knew her need for control, for optics, for having the perfect narrative. Mason, the dropout brother who worked retail and lived like a ghost, didn't fit her brand. Nick, the confident lawyer with the nice watch and the LinkedIn headshot, did. And my parents? They just let it happen. That night, I sat in the guest room and stared at the ceiling. Everything felt heavy, like a weight had settled into my chest and refused to move. I wasn't just angry, I was hurt. Deeply. The kind of hurt that doesn't come from a single moment, but from 100 small ones stacked on top of each other until they crush you. The years of being the afterthought. The "he's just figuring things out, son." The joke. I thought about the times I'd stayed home to help Mom when she was sick. The times I drove Liam to soccer tournaments across state lines. The time I bailed Jenna out when her car broke down in college, driving 3 hours with a gas can and jumper cables. None of it mattered. Not when it came to the image. Not when it came to her image. The next morning, I got a text from Jenna. "Hey, saw you didn't come. We missed you." Nick stepped in. "Hope that's okay." No apology. Just that smug tone again. That, I win energy she always carried. And something in me flipped. I wasn't going back. Not to that. Not to being edited out of my own life. That day, I took a walk. No music, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. And by the time I got back, I knew exactly what I needed to do. They had made a mistake. A big one. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for their approval. I was looking for closure. And maybe a little revenge. The day after Jenna's message, I deleted Instagram. Not out of spite. Just clarity. I'd been staring at the same performative highlight reel for years. Smiling family photos that cropped out reality, shiny achievements with captions about hard work and blessings. Inside jokes that never included me. I realized I didn't need to see it anymore. I didn't want to. I was done watching my own life from the outside. If I was going to start over, I needed to stop looking back. That wasn't easy, by the way. Starting over never is. Especially when you don't have much. Alex, true to his word, let me stay as long as I needed. But I started feeling like a squatter by week 3. The guest room was barely wider than the futon, and I could hear every faucet and floorboard creak in the apartment, but it was still the most peace I'd had in years. Still, I couldn't ignore that quiet voice in the back of my head that whispered, "Don't overstay. Don't become a burden." So I found a job. Not the dream one. Just a job. A local art supply store needed someone part-time, stocking shelves, helping customers, restocking sketchbooks, charcoal, paintbrushes. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was better than the bookstore. And it came with a discount. That part mattered more than I admitted. I remember my first shift. I was in the back, unpacking a box of oil paints, when I saw it. A little note scribbled in Sharpie on the cardboard. "This color will save someone's soul. Don't let it dry out." I laughed. I still don't know who wrote it. Probably some bored employee with a poetic streak. But I cut that part of the box out and taped it above my bed that night. It felt weirdly personal, like the universe tapping me on the shoulder. In the evenings, I sketched. Not for money. Not for school. Just for me. I stopped trying to make marketable designs and started drawing what I actually saw. People in cafes, the old woman with the giant tote bag who rode the bus every day, the overgrown alley behind Alex's building where weeds cracked through the concrete. Nothing polished. Just real. I filled up 3 sketchbooks in a month. It felt like breathing again after being underwater too long. I also started running. Not far at first. Just a few blocks. But the rhythm helped. It gave my thoughts a place to go. I wasn't running from anything. Just through things. Pain, confusion, memories. Every step made them quieter. Alex noticed. He never said anything directly, but I caught him watching me sometimes, smiling when I came back from a run drenched in sweat, nodding quietly when I'd show him a new drawing. He knew. He could see it. The rebuilding. But life wasn't suddenly perfect. There were still bad days. Like the day I saw my old manager from the bookstore walk into the art shop. He didn't recognize me at first, but when he did, his eyes lit up. "Mason. Hey, didn't know you left." I shrugged. Needed a change. He nodded. "Makes sense. Hey, listen, we've got a part-time opening again. If you want to come back." I smiled politely and said I'd think about it. But I didn't think about it. Not once. I didn't want to go back to the fluorescent lights and dusty corners and customers arguing over $1.99 bookmarks. I didn't want to go back to a version of myself that didn't know how to leave. Still, that night I sat in the park behind the shop and cried. Not because I missed the bookstore, but because I realized how far I'd come. I hadn't even noticed. I'd been so focused on surviving that I hadn't realized I was actually living again. That hit harder than I expected. The fall had already happened. This was the rise. 1 week later, something strange happened. My sketches started getting noticed. I'd been pinning a few up on the community board at the shop, mostly to fill space, honestly, but customers started asking about them. A woman came in one day, pointed to a charcoal sketch I did of a guy playing the saxophone on the subway, and said, "How much for this?" I blinked. "It's not for sale." She smiled. "It should be." That night, Alex helped me set up a small online portfolio. Nothing fancy, just a few high-res scans, a short bio, a PayPal link. We called it Lines Between, after a note I'd scribbled in one of my drawings. Life happens in the lines between what you meant and what you said. I didn't expect much, but within 2 weeks, I sold 3 prints. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, not through the lens of a family name or a job title. Just seen. Mason, the guy who sketches people when they're not looking. Mason, the guy who finds poetry in fire escapes and cracked sidewalks. Mason, the The guy who finally believed he had something to offer. Around the same time, I got an email from a local gallery. Someone had seen my prints online, probably one of the customers from the shop, and passed along my name. They were putting together a community exhibition featuring local artists. No fees, no commissions, just a chance to show your work. They invited me to participate. I read the email twice before I believed it. I didn't tell anyone right away, not even Alex. I just replied yes and started choosing pieces. I wasn't aiming to impress anyone. I just wanted to tell the truth. Visually, at least. A week later, I ran into Liam. Total accident. I was walking out of the grocery store, arms full of oranges and protein bars, when I heard someone shout my name. Mason. I turned, and there he was. He looked taller somehow. More tired, too. He was wearing his team hoodie, but his face didn't carry that usual teenage smugness. Just something softer. I thought that was you, he said, jogging up. Hey, I said cautiously. You haven't answered my texts. I know. He shoved his hands in his hoodie pocket. Mom's still upset. I didn't say anything. He shifted awkwardly. I'm not here to guilt trip you. I don't know. Wanted to see how you were doing. I'm doing okay, I said. Better, actually. That's good. He paused, then added, You look different. I smirked. In a bad way? No, just calmer. We stood in silence for a second. Then he said, They really messed up, huh? I blinked. He looked down at the pavement. The birthday, the card, all of it. I don't know why I laughed. It wasn't funny. It was mean. I studied him. He looked genuinely remorseful. Not rehearsed. Not coaxed. Just raw. You followed their lead, I said. We all do that sometimes. I don't want it anymore, he muttered. Jenna's the worst about it. She always sets the tone. Dad just co-signs it. And Mom, he trailed off. She stays quiet. Yeah. I exhaled. I know. He looked up at me, eyes glassy. You think you'll ever come back? To the house? Yeah. I looked away. I don't know. Not like before. He nodded slowly. I miss you. That hit harder than I expected. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, I miss you too. We didn't hug or anything. Just stood there for another minute before I told him I had to get going. But I watched him walk away for a long time. That night, I told Alex everything. About the gallery. About Liam. About how I wasn't sure what I felt anymore. Alex smiled. That means you're healing. Healing sucks. He laughed. Yeah, but you're doing it anyway. I didn't respond. Just sat there with a bowl of cereal and the quiet hum of traffic outside the window. 2 days later, the gallery opened. It wasn't a big event. No red carpet. No spotlights. Just a handful of local artists, a rented space, and a table with cheap wine and crackers. But when I walked in and saw my pieces hanging on the wall, real, framed, lit by soft bulbs, I felt something loosen in my chest. Like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. People stopped to look. Some lingered. One woman cried in front of a sketch I did of a man sitting alone in a laundromat. She asked me what it meant. I told her I didn't know, that it just felt true. She nodded. That's exactly it. And then she hugged me. Later that night, after the show ended, I got a message. Not from Jenna. Not from Mom. From Dad. Just 3 words. We saw it. That was all. But I knew what it meant. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because the story wasn't finished. Not until they saw the whole picture. The gallery show changed something. Not just in me, but in them. After Dad's message, I half expected a flood of texts or maybe even a call, but nothing came. Just those 3 words. We saw it. No congratulations, no apology, no follow-up. And weirdly, that silence told me everything. It meant they'd finally noticed I existed outside of their narrative. That I had built something without them. And now, they didn't know how to react. Maybe they were waiting for me to crawl back, to be grateful that they noticed. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I was done performing for people who only watched when I failed. And still, I wasn't angry. Not exactly. What I felt now was colder. Cleaner. Focused. Like I'd been standing in the fog for years, and now I could finally see the road ahead. And I knew exactly where it led. I didn't want them to hurt. That would be too easy. I wanted them to understand. I wanted them to see, not just me, but everything they'd been blind to. All the moments they'd brushed off. All the words they never said. All the choices that chipped away at me while they called it love. I wanted them to feel that slow burn of realization. That quiet, creeping shame when the mirror finally reflects something you don't like. But I also knew they'd never get there on their own. So I decided to help them. The plan came together slowly, part instinct, part strategy. I didn't want drama. I didn't want a public confrontation. I wanted something more subtle, more permanent. And I wasn't doing it alone. It started with Alex, of course. He was the first person I let into the plan. We were sitting on the fire escape of his apartment one night, passing a cheap bottle of wine between us, when I said, I think I'm going to throw a show. My own show. Not the gallery stuff. Just mine. He raised an eyebrow. Like a solo exhibit? Yeah. Bigger. More curated. Personal. A story. Okay, he said slowly. And you want them to come? I want them to see. Really see. Everything. Alex sipped the wine, then nodded. So a trap. But make it classy. I grinned. Exactly. We started planning that night. The idea was simple. An art exhibit, but not just sketches or paintings. A timeline. A memoir in graphite and ink. A walkthrough of my life. The highs, the lows, the quiet pain. Each piece would be paired with a small note, handwritten. Some would be direct quotes. Others would be unspoken thoughts. Some would just be dates, circled in red. I didn't want it to be about blame. I wanted it to be true. Over the next month, I worked like a man possessed. I stopped taking extra shifts at the art shop. I poured every waking hour into sketching, planning, writing. I filled notebooks with moments I'd buried. My 18th birthday, when Mom forgot to pick me up from school and laughed when I walked home in the rain. The time Dad told me, you're not a failure, you're just not built for success. The dinner when Jenna announced her job offer and everyone toasted, while my promotion at the bookstore got a, that's nice, Mason. I recreated them all. Visually. Symbolically. Literally, in some cases. One piece was a child's chair at an adult table, legs sawn off to keep it from standing. Another was just a dark hallway with a single door open, and the words, too late, he's already left, carved into the floor. Each piece came with a date and a name. I didn't call anyone out. I didn't have to. The art spoke for itself. Alex helped with logistics, securing a venue, figuring out lighting, drafting invites. He had a friend named Yasmin who ran a boutique design studio, and she offered to help with the show branding. We called it the Empty Stand, after the cake stand from my birthday. A symbol. A message. Yasmin loved it. It's haunting. Honest. People are going to talk about this. I hoped so. And then came the harder part, the invitations. I didn't want to just post about the show on socials. I wanted to invite them. Directly. No hiding. No passive-aggressive subtweets. Just a clean, crisp invite with my name, the date, the location, and the title, The Empty Stand, a solo show by Mason Elliott. No explanation. No emotional plea. Just the facts. I mailed it to my parents. Jenna, Liam, even Nick, because of course I did. I wanted him there too, not out of malice, but because he was part of the story now. The stand-in. The ghost in my seat. They had a choice, show up or stay away. And if they came, they'd get the message. Loud and clear. In the meantime, I kept building. The show was a month away, and I wanted it to be perfect. I recruited another friend of Alex's, Mara, a lighting designer, to help set the mood. Each room would be lit differently. The childhood section would be soft, warm light, slowly turning cooler and harsher as you walked deeper into the exhibit. The final room? Bare bulbs. No warmth. Just truth. We even added audio. Snippets of family conversations I'd recorded over the years. Quiet background noise you'd only catch if you stopped to listen. A voice saying, he'll figure it out eventually. Laughter. A clink of glasses. My own voice, barely audible, saying, yeah, I'm fine. And the final track? Me blowing out candles. On nothing. Just the sound of breath. We looped it. 2 weeks before the show, I saw Jenna again. It was at a cafe downtown. Total accident. She was in line behind me. I felt her presence before I heard her voice. Mason. I turned, slowly. She looked good, as always. Polished, confident, blazer over a blouse like she'd stepped out of a Pinterest board. But her expression faltered when she saw me. Like she hadn't expected me to look. Okay. Hey, I said calmly. I got your invite. Oh yeah. I didn't realize you were still doing art. I never stopped. She nodded, fidgeting with her phone. Is it like a real show? With people? It's a solo exhibit. I curated it myself. Another nod. Then, Mom's been asking about it. She can come. Jenna shifted. She's nervous. She should be. I stepped aside as my order was ready. Black coffee, no sugar, and walked to the cream station. Jenna followed. Is it about us? It's about me. But we're in it, right? I looked her dead in the eyes. You were always in it. You just didn't notice. She opened her mouth to reply, then stopped. Something flickered in her eyes. Shame? Maybe. Maybe not. I'll be there, she said quietly. Good. She turned to leave, but then paused. You look different. I smiled. That's the idea. The last week before the show was chaos. Final pieces framed. Audio tested. Lighting calibrated. I barely slept. But I felt alive. Every brushstroke felt like a sentence I never got to say. Every shadow felt like a memory reclaimed. And when I finally stepped back the night before opening and looked at the full exhibit, I almost cried. Not because it was sad. Because it was mine. All of it. The next day was the show. And by 6:15 p.m., people were already lining up outside. Friends from the art shop. Customers. Local artists. Alex's photographer friends. Even my old manager from the bookstore came by. The space buzzed with conversation, camera flashes, soft gasps. People moved slowly through the rooms, reading the notes, standing in silence. Some cried. Some stood for 10 minutes in front of a single piece. And then, at 7:02 p.m., they arrived. Mom, Dad, Jenna, Liam, even Nick. They looked nervous. Out of place. Like tourists in a country where they didn't speak the language. I didn't go to them. I just watched. They walked through the exhibit slowly. Mom stopped in front of a sketch titled Invisible Dinner, a table with one plate missing. Dad lingered at the bench, a memory from when he promised to come to my art fair and never showed up. Liam stared for a long time at a piece called Muted Applause, hands clapping in silence, the figure in the center with no mouth. And Jenna? She froze in front of the empty stand. It was the centerpiece, a charcoal rendering of the birthday moment, me standing in front of an empty cake stand, candles burning in midair, everyone else mid-laugh. The caption underneath simply said, "At least you tried." She didn't move for 5 minutes. When they finally left the exhibit, none of them said a word. Not to me, not to each other. They just walked out into the night, faces pale, shoulders heavy. I stood in the shadows and watched. Not smiling, not crying, just still. Because this wasn't the revenge. This was the mirror. They didn't say a word after the show. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the week after. I half expected them to lash out, or at least defend themselves, something, anything. But there was nothing but silence. And that silence said more than any apology ever could. It told me that they'd seen it, that they'd felt it, and they didn't know how to respond, because there was no defense. The mirror had been held up, and for once, they didn't like their own reflection. But this wasn't over. The exhibit was just the reveal. My revenge, if you can even call it that, wasn't about embarrassing them. It was about freeing me, about removing their power. And now that I had it back, I could do what they never expected, rewrite the story. Mine. Theirs. All of it. It began with the will. What they didn't know, what I'd never told them, was that Grandpa Elliot had left something behind. Not money exactly, but property. A cabin. He'd passed away 5 years ago, and everyone assumed the cabin had been sold with his other assets. But it hadn't. Grandpa had quietly transferred the deed to me before he died. Said I was the only one who ever truly listened to him. Said the others would just sell it off or use it for photo ops. It wasn't worth a fortune, just a small, run-down place by a lake 2 hours out, but it was mine. A gift. Untouched, unclaimed, off their radar. I'd kept the deed in a box with my old sketchbooks and forgot about it for years. But now, it was the key. I spent the next month fixing it up. Used every spare dollar I had, took weekend trips with Alex, hired local help when I needed it. We sanded floors, painted walls, rewired lighting. I even built a small studio space in the back with skylights for natural light. It became a sanctuary. Quiet, still, sacred. No laughter at my expense. No birthday jokes. Just wind, water, and pencils against paper. Once it was finished, I filed for an LLC, Empty Stand Studios, and used the cabin as the legal address. It was symbolic, sure, but it was also practical, because now I had a business, a brand, a space to work, host, teach. And that's when I made my next move. I sent them another letter. Not a message, not a card, a formal envelope, printed with the Empty Stand Studios logo, addressed individually to each of them. Inside was a personalized invitation. You are cordially invited to attend the private unveiling of the Mirror Room, the final installation in the empty stand collection. This experience is by invitation only. No photography allowed. No plus ones. No phones. Date, redacted. Location, provided upon RSVP confirmation. Please respond within 48 hours to secure your viewing time. Mason Elliott, founder, Empty Stand Studios. Jenna RSVP'd first. Within 20 minutes. Then mom. Then dad. Liam didn't reply. Instead, he called me. Hey, he said hesitant. Do I need to RSVP formally, or can I just come? You're already on the list, I said. He let out a breath. Cool. Just wanted to make sure. They didn't know what they were walking into. The mirror room wasn't a gallery piece. It was the lesson. I staggered the times. Made sure they'd all arrive separately. First Jenna. Then dad. Then mom. Liam last. No distractions. No support system to lean on. Just them and the room. It was a single space. One large mirror on each wall. A single chair in the center. And 4 speakers in the corners, playing different audio loops. Real recordings, layered memories, carefully selected moments. Not yelling. Not fights. Just quiet. Damaging lines they'd probably forgotten. You're being too sensitive, Mason. Let your sister talk. He's still figuring things out. You'll never make a living off doodles. Each line played every few minutes. A pause in between. Just enough silence to think. On the floor, I'd painted a timeline. Each year marked. Important dates labeled. My graduation. My first gallery show. My birthday. Their absences circled in red. And on the seat, the card. At least you tried. The original. The one from my birthday. Laminated. Preserved. They each stayed longer than I expected. Jenna emerged first. Pale. Quiet. She didn't look at me. Just said, thank you, and walked to her car. Her eyes were glassy. Her hands trembled slightly. Dad came next. He didn't speak. He just sat on the porch of the cabin for a long while. Eventually, he said, you're a better man than I was at your age. I nodded. That's not an apology, I said. I know, he replied. I'm still working on it. Mom came out crying. Not the dramatic kind. Not the performative sobs. Just slow tears. Silent. She hugged me. I didn't hug back. But I didn't pull away, either. I thought I was helping you toughen up, she whispered. I know. I didn't realize I was making you disappear. I said nothing. Liam came last. He walked into the room and didn't come out for over an hour. When he did, he looked changed. Not broken. Just older. Wiser. I wish I'd said something back then, he said. You still can. He looked me in the eye. I'm proud of you. That one landed. After they all left, I sat in the mirror room alone. Let the words echo. Let the silence stretch. Then I turned off the audio, packed the speakers, and closed the door. The show was over. That week, Jenna posted nothing. No photos. No stories. No humble brags. Mom took down all her family Facebook albums. Dad called once, just to talk. No agenda. Liam came by the cabin a week later with burgers and a bottle of wine. We watched the lake in silence and talked about nothing. And for the first time in a long time, it felt okay. Not perfect. Not healed. But true. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need validation. I had something better. My voice. My name. My place at the table, one I built myself. And they would never forget it. Not after the empty stand. Not after the mirror room. Not after watching the son they overlooked become the man they couldn't ignore. Final line. They gave me a card that said, at least you tried. And in the end, they were right. I did try, and I won. When I was 15, I knew I wasn't the favorite, but I didn't think my own father would one day look me in the eyes and say, pack your things, Mason. You don't belong here anymore. I'm 30 now, and yeah, that moment still plays on a loop in my head more often than I care to admit. Let me back up a bit. I'm Mason, and I'm the second son in a family that worshipped the first. My older brother, Zach, is 2 years older than me. Tall, charming, always knew the right thing to say. He could crash my bike, lie about it to my face, and somehow still get praised for telling the truth eventually. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. I'd keep my head down, try to be helpful, clean up messes I didn't make, and still get asked why I couldn't be more like Zach. We grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and our last name meant something because of the business our family built from the ground up. My grandfather started it, Taylor & Sons Auto, a repair and restoration shop that became kind of legendary around here. Classic Mustangs, 60s Impalas, old Harley builds. They passed through our garage like family heirlooms. And yeah, there was pride in that. My dad, Richard Taylor, took it over when Grandpa retired. He ran it like a general, strict, efficient, no nonsense. But beneath the surface, he was a hard man to please. Especially with me. Zach could joke around in the middle of a customer call and get a pat on the back. I'd spend 3 extra hours organizing the tool bay and get told, "Don't waste time on stuff no one sees." By the time I hit my early 20s, it was clear that Zach would inherit the business. And honestly, I was okay with that. I never wanted to be the boss. I liked being behind the scenes, tuning engines, finding parts no one else could track down. I didn't need the spotlight. I just wanted to be part of it. Part of the legacy. Part of something my grandfather built with his bare hands. Something we used to talk about over greasy burgers when I was 10 and thought tightening bolts was the coolest job in the world. But slowly, things started to change. It began with the small things. Dad would ask Zach for input during team meetings and completely ignore mine, even if I was the one who solved the issue the day before. I'd suggest upgrading our inventory system. Zach would laugh it off, and Dad would say, "You hear that, Zach? Mason wants to fix what ain't broke." The jokes stung more than they should have. I stopped speaking up. Then came the money issues. I wasn't paid as much as Zach. When I asked about it, Dad said it was because Zach was being groomed for leadership. I wasn't. I was just lucky to be there. That one hurt. I let it slide. Told myself maybe they had a plan for me too. But the real punch to the gut came the year I turned 28. I was living in the apartment above the garage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was free, and I was saving up to buy my own place. Every morning, I'd roll out of bed, grab coffee, and be in the pit before the guys even clocked in. I ran diagnostics, ordered specialty parts, dealt with suppliers from out of state, stuff Zach never touched. And still, I was invisible. Until one evening, Dad called a family meeting, which was weird. We never did family meetings. Mom made lasagna. Zach was already grinning like he knew something, and I just had this tight feeling in my gut the whole time. Something was off. We sat around the kitchen table, and Dad cleared his throat like he was announcing a will reading. "I've made a decision," he said. "It's time to start transferring ownership." I remember the way Mom kept her eyes down, like she couldn't look at me. "I've officially signed over the business to Zach," Dad continued. "Effective next month." I blinked. Once. Twice. Tried to process it. Then he said it, just casually, like it was no big deal. "And Mason, you'll need to vacate the apartment by the end of the month. Zach needs the space." I just stared at him. At all of them. Waiting for someone to say it was a joke. For Mom to step in. For Zach to say, "Come on, Dad, that's too much." But no one did. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't even ask why. I just nodded, stood up, and walked out. That was 6 months ago. I packed my things that night, drove away before sunrise, and didn't look back. I found a cheap one-bedroom in the next town over, took a job at a competitor's garage, and started fresh. No one knew my last name there. No one cared who my father was or what my brother inherited. They just saw what I could do. I kept my head down and worked. And then, 3 days ago, my phone lit up. It was my dad. Calling. First time since that night. I stared at the screen. Watched it ring. Saw the voicemail icon pop up. Later, I listened. His voice was hoarse. Almost broken. "Mason, please. Something's happened. I need to talk to you. It's about Zach." I didn't call back. Not yet. Because something in his voice told me everything had finally started to unravel. And I wanted to hear every crack as it fell apart. When I didn't call him back, I expected my dad to get angry. That's what he always did when he didn't get his way. Growing up, disappointment wasn't some gentle conversation about how I could do better. It was the cold shoulder, snide remarks, sometimes even public shaming in front of Zach. But this time, he didn't lash out. He called again the next day, left another voicemail. This time, he didn't bother hiding the desperation in his voice. "Mason, please. I don't know who else to turn to. Just call me back. I made a mistake." I played that one twice. Funny how it takes a mistake to realize who you pushed away. But I wasn't ready to give him anything yet. Not a call, not a visit, not even a text. I needed to sit with it. To make sure I wasn't walking back into another storm pretending to be a family dinner. Because here's the truth. The 6 months before that voicemail weren't just healing. They were sobering. I started seeing things I had ignored for too long. Like the time I fixed the shop's hydraulic lift on a Sunday morning, alone, because Zach forgot to schedule the maintenance. It saved us thousands in repairs. Dad didn't say thanks. Instead, he asked why I hadn't also swept the floor while I was at it. Or the Christmas before that, when Zach got a Rolex, and I got a $25 gas card and a handshake. Not that I needed the money or the watch. But you notice the imbalance. You remember it. Especially when your name isn't even written on the card. But none of that compared to what happened the week after my 29th birthday. I had just gotten back from visiting an out-of-town supplier. Drove 5 hours straight to pick up a rare 69 GTO part we needed for a big-ticket client. Zach was supposed to handle it, but he'd gone off to Tahoe with his girlfriend for the weekend and left me with a scribbled list and zero context. When I dropped the part off at the shop Monday morning, I walked in and found Zach holding cord in the office, feet on the desk, sipping his overpriced cold brew like he ran the world. Dad was sitting next to him, laughing at some story I had probably lived through, and he was now retelling like it was his idea. When they saw me, Zach gave a lazy wave. "Hey man, you get the part." I held it up, still in the box. Dad clapped once. "That's my boy. Always reliable." I almost smiled. Almost. Until he added, "It's good to have someone like you supporting Zach's leadership. Not everyone's meant to lead, and that's okay." It was like being kicked in the chest. Supporting Zach's leadership. As if I hadn't just driven 10 hours round trip because Zach bailed. As if I hadn't spent every weekend for the past year picking up the slack while he played CEO on Instagram. I went back to the apartment above the garage and started packing that night. Dad called it bad timing. Said I was overreacting. Zach told me I needed a reality check because Dad's just trying to do what's best for the company. So I left. No fight. No tears. I didn't even slam the door. I just quietly walked away from the family that never saw me unless they needed something. That was my breaking point. Or so I thought. Fast forward 6 months to the voicemail. The one where Dad sounded like he'd swallowed broken glass. I still hadn't called him back. But curiosity started gnawing at me. Not concern, just curiosity. Because if Dad was calling me for help, something must have gone seriously sideways. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove back into town. Didn't go to the shop. Just parked across the street from the old diner where mechanics used to grab lunch. It was still there, still had the same cracked sign and the best chili dogs you'd ever eat at 1 a.m. I sat in my car and watched. Around noon, I saw one of the old guys, Pete, walk out with a to-go bag. Pete had been working at Taylor & Sons since before I could drive. Solid guy. Liked to call me Little Wrench when I was a kid. I rolled down my window. He spotted me and blinked like he wasn't sure if I was real. Then he smiled. "Mason? Thought you vanished." "Hey, Pete. Just passing through." He came over to the car, leaned down. "You heard then?" I frowned. "Heard what?" He let out a low whistle. "Man, your brother's made a mess." My stomach dropped. "What kind of mess?" Pete looked around, like someone might overhear. "You didn't hear it from me, okay? But Zach's been bleeding the business dry. Fancy parties, personal trips charged to the shop, consulting fees for people who don't exist. Couple vendors haven't been paid in months. Customers are pulling their cars. Place is hanging on by a thread." I sat back in my seat. And there it was. The beginning of the unraveling. I thanked Pete and drove off. Didn't go to see my dad. Not yet. But the image stuck with me. The garage, once buzzing with machines and cigarette smoke and country rock, now quiet. Empty bays. Customers gone. The legacy fading. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt something else. Something closer to clarity. That night, I listened to the third voicemail. The one where my dad finally admitted the truth. "Mason, I should have listened to you. I should have seen it. Zach's in trouble. We're all in trouble. The shop, it's not what it used to be. I need your help. I don't know what else to do." He sounded smaller. Not like the man who once barked at me for using the wrong socket size. He sounded tired. Worn down. But he wasn't the only one who had changed. Because while the shop was falling apart, I'd been building something new. The garage I joined after leaving? They saw what I could do. Promoted me in 3 months. I wasn't running things, but I was making decisions, earning respect, and for the first time in my life, feeling like I belonged. And secretly, I'd started something on the side. A YouTube channel, Wrench and Rust. Just me, working on restoration projects, showing people how to bring old cars back to life. The first few videos barely got 10 views. But then one went semi-viral. A 72 Challenger rebuild with time-lapse and narration. I hit 100K subscribers within 3 months. Brands started reaching out. Sponsors. Partnerships. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't invisible either, which made what happened next so much worse. Because just as I started to feel like I'd moved on, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a framed photo of me and my grandfather. I was 10, holding a wrench twice the size of my arm. He had his hand on my shoulder. We were standing in front of the original Taylor & Sons sign. Taped to the back was a note. 5 words. He always believed in you. No signature. No explanation. But I knew who it was from. Only one person had access to that photo. Only one person would use it to tug at a memory I hadn't touched in years. My mom. I hadn't heard from her since I left either. She'd always been complicit. Silent. The kind of parent who'd set the table while the argument raged. But she never said a bad word about me. And she loved Grandpa. So that note hit me harder than any voicemail ever could. Because it made me remember what the garage used to be. Not what it became under Dad and Zach, but what it was when Grandpa ran it. It wasn't about money, or image, or favoritism. It was about fixing things, restoring what was broken. And now, maybe that's what I was being asked to do. Not for Dad, not for Zach, but for the legacy. Still, I wasn't about to run back with open arms. So I made a call. Not to Dad, to someone else. Someone who'd been quietly watching things crumble from the inside. And what she told me, that was the real betrayal. The kind that takes everything you thought you knew about your family and burns it to the ground. The person I called wasn't an old friend or a mechanic or anyone from the business world. It was Melissa. She was the shop's accountant for over a decade and probably the only person who ever treated me with basic respect during the mess that was my final year at Taylor & Sons. Melissa wasn't flashy, didn't talk much, but she saw everything. She kept her head down, did the books, and stayed out of the family politics, until now. When I reached out, I didn't even expect her to answer. But she picked up on the second ring. Mason. Her voice was sharp with surprise, maybe even suspicion. Hey, I said, pacing in my apartment, phone to my ear. Sorry for calling out of nowhere. I heard things might be rough back at the shop. There was a pause. Then, with a bitter little laugh, she said, rough? That's one way to put it. We ended up talking for nearly an hour. She filled in the blanks. After I left, Zach went full Golden Boy Meet CEO. He redesigned the logo, tried to rebrand the entire business as Taylor Performance, wanted to attract a younger, higher-paying demographic, even though most of our loyal customers were old-school restoration junkies who didn't care about shiny marketing. He fired 2 of the original techs, hired a bunch of influencers to do garage lifestyle shoots on site, pushed a fake sponsorship deal with a tire company that turned out to be a cousin of his girlfriend playing dress-up in Photoshop. Melissa warned my dad. Repeatedly. He didn't listen. Or maybe he didn't want to admit that the golden boy had turned into a con man in slow motion. But the worst part? The money's gone, Mason, Melissa said quietly. I mean really gone. I've been digging through the books. He drained the main account. Took out a second mortgage on the property. There are liens from unpaid suppliers. If the IRS takes a closer look, they're going to see fraud. I sat down hard. My kitchen chair creaked under me. How the hell did this happen in 6 months? Because you weren't there to stop it. That hit harder than I wanted to admit. She didn't say it like blame, more like fact. Melissa went on. You know what else? He's trying to pin it on you. He told your dad some of the debts were from your last orders, your supplier contacts, leftover unpaid invoices from your era. My mouth actually dropped open. What? He's covering himself. Gaslighting your dad. Making it sound like you were the problem all along. And that's when something shifted inside me. Not anger, at least not yet. It was something deeper. A sense of finality. Like a glass finally shattering after holding a hairline crack for too long. I had walked away from the family business to keep my dignity. But now I realized, Zach hadn't just let it burn. He was rewriting the fire. That's what betrayal really is. It's not the theft. It's not the insult. It's the lie they tell about you after you're gone. The next 2 weeks were a blur. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't focus. Not out of regret, but because part of me still cared. Not about Zach. Not even about my dad, really. But about what the shop used to be. About what I used to be when I still believed I belonged there. I tried to bury myself in my work. The new garage was busier than ever, and I was managing a team now. 5 guys, 2 lifts, and a 6-month waitlist for our custom engine builds. I was in charge of hiring, training, vendor relationships. I'd even started mentoring a kid straight out of trade school who reminded me of myself at 19, quiet, observant, always asking the right questions. And wrench and rust. That little YouTube side project? It exploded. A sponsor reached out, a tool company that saw my rebuild of a 1967 Camaro RS. They offered free gear in exchange for a 2-minute shout-out. Nothing crazy, but it was a start. Then the views snowballed. One video hit 1.2 million. I started getting emails from magazines, car shows, even a documentary team asking if I'd be willing to talk about modern garage culture. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been invisible for years at a shop with my own last name on the building, and now strangers on the internet wanted to know my story. And still, I didn't tell them. I kept it quiet. Because this new life, I was building it for me. Not for recognition. Not for revenge. Just to prove to myself that I wasn't broken. That I never was. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Thursday, thick envelope, real fancy paper. My name on the front in stiff black ink. Inside was a notice, legal, formal, cold. Zach was suing me. Allegedly, I had sabotaged company systems prior to departure, leading to lost revenue and client trust. He wanted damages. Real ones. 6 figures. I couldn't breathe. Not because I believed he'd win, but because I couldn't believe he had the audacity. This wasn't just a smear campaign now. It was war. I called Melissa again. She sounded stunned, but not surprised. He must be desperate, she said. He knows he's circling the drain, and he's trying to drag someone else down with him. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I could have fought it publicly. Could have called every supplier I'd ever worked with. Could have leaked the books. Could have blasted receipts across every platform I had. But something held me back. And that something was my grandfather. Because I kept thinking about that photo. About the way he used to talk about integrity. He had this saying, "You don't win by burning the garage. You win by building a better engine." And for the first time in a long time, I finally understood what he meant. Let them burn it. Let them lie. I didn't need to fight fire with fire. I just needed to build something so loud, so undeniable, so true, that the smoke from their collapse couldn't hide it anymore. So I got to work. I expanded the channel, launched a Patreon, exclusive videos, early access, live Q&As, bought new filming gear, partnered with a small custom parts brand that let me design my own limited edition tool roll. And then, without announcing it to anyone, I rented a space. Small but mine. A dusty warehouse with good bones and bad lighting. I called in a few favors. Rewired the place. Built out 2 bays. Painted the walls myself. Bought the same tool cabinets my grandfather used. Found a rusted out set on Craigslist and restored them by hand. Every night, I'd work late, alone, headphones in, smell of oil and possibility thick in the air. The world outside could collapse. But in that space, I was becoming again. And I started planning something bigger. Not revenge. Not yet. But a project. A rebuild. Not of a car. Of a legacy. One that would carry the right name this time. My name. And just when I thought I had everything under control, when I finally started to feel like maybe the past couldn't hurt me anymore, I got a message. Not a call. Not a letter. A text. From my mother. Just 2 words. He knows. And in that moment, every nerve in my body lit up. Because I didn't know if she meant Zach. Or Dad. But either way, someone was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be leaving. The message from my mother hit me like a cold gust through an open window. He knows. I must have read it a dozen times, standing there in the middle of my new shop with grease on my palms, and my playlist looping some dusty Lynyrd Skynyrd track. My mind raced. Who was he? Zach? My father? What did he know? About the channel? About Melissa? About the second garage? I stared at the screen for another minute before typing a response. Knows what? No reply. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I called. No answer. Then the 3 dots popped up, typing, and vanished. Then again. And gone. I just stood there, heart thudding in my ears like it used to when I was a kid and Dad called me downstairs using that tone. That "we need to talk" tone. Only this time, I wasn't a kid anymore. That night, I barely slept. Every worst-case scenario played out in my head. Maybe Zach had discovered Melissa talked to me and threatened her job. Maybe Dad had dug into the channel and figured out I'd been profiting off what he still thought was his legacy. Maybe they were planning to sue me again, but louder this time, dragging my name through the mud in front of actual media outlets now that I had some kind of following. But then the more dangerous thought crept in. Maybe he wanted something. Something only I could give. The next morning, I drove out to the old neighborhood. Not to the shop, but the outskirts. A place where self-service dropped and nobody ever checked their mailbox. There's a storage unit there I've kept for years. Originally just for extra tools and some of Grandpa's old stuff after he passed. But lately, I'd started storing more strategic things. Boxes of documents, printouts, bank records, even a few video backups I'd quietly made after talking to Melissa. Because part of me always knew this wasn't over. Inside that metal-walled box of dust and nostalgia, I found what I needed, my grandfather's old ledger. Not digital, not online, just paper, pencil, smudged fingerprints, and scribbled dates. It was the original record-keeping book from the first 2 decades of Taylor & Sons, back when he still worked 7 days a week and used nicknames for clients in the margins. It reminded me of who the business was supposed to serve, of what we'd lost when it became about image over integrity. And it reminded me of who I used to be. Not angry, not bitter, just capable. That was the day I started planning. Not just a comeback, a reckoning. But it had to be clean. No public shaming. No YouTube drama. No angry confrontations in front of cameras. That's not who I was. And frankly, Zach would love that. He'd twist it into a pity campaign. Play the victim. So I needed to be smart. Quiet. Precise. I called Melissa again. This time, I had questions. And this time, she had answers. First, I asked about ownership. Legally, she said, your father still owns the land the garage sits on. Zach owns the business name, the branding, the inventory, but not the property. I sat with that for a second. So he's a tenant? Exactly. A tenant who's several months behind on rent. That opened a door. Then I asked about suppliers. Turns out, half the people Zach owed money to were the same folks I'd worked with directly back in the day, guys who still respected me. Some of them hadn't seen a payment since I left. A few were threatening lawsuits of their own. And then I asked about employees. Apparently, Zach had churned through 3 managers in 6 months. 2 of them had reached out to Melissa privately, asking if she knew whether I was working elsewhere and if I was hiring. I took a long breath. The cracks were everywhere. And I didn't have to create them. I just had to be there when they broke open. Over the next few weeks, I started reaching out. Quietly, casually, never through the same platform twice. I called Sam, the welder I used to work with who left 2 months after me. He'd moved downstate to work for a franchise shop, but he hated it. I met up with Tina, the receptionist who ran circles around the whole crew and used to slip me extra printouts when Zach accidentally deleted emails. She'd been fired over some made-up policy violation. She hugged me like I was family when she saw me. And I visited one of our oldest clients, Mr. Hawkins, the classic Ford collector who used to drop off battered beauties for us to bring back from the dead. He was in his late 70s now, still sharp, still driving the Thunderbird we restored together 5 years ago. I don't go there no more, he told me, sipping coffee on his porch. They lost my trust. Lost the paper trail on my Fairlane. Claimed they never quoted me. I didn't say anything. Just listened. Whole place feels different now, he said. Like it's got no soul. You ever open up your own place? Mason, you let me know. I'll bring every last car I got. That sealed it. I sat in my office that weekend, lights dim, screens glowing. I looked at the plans I'd sketched on a whiteboard the night I signed the lease to my own garage. Back then, I'd written a single word at the top, legacy. Now I circled it. Then I made some calls. I wasn't just building a repair shop anymore. I was launching a restoration collective, a space for classic builds, custom engine work, live-stream projects, and walk-in repairs, all under one roof. But it wasn't about the money or the flash. It was about building what my grandfather dreamed of. And it was about timing, because I knew something Zach didn't. In 2 weeks, the town would host the annual Founders Auto Fair, a car expo, swap meet, and networking event rolled into one. It was the biggest local event of the year. Every vendor, enthusiast, and vintage nut would be there. And Taylor & Sons had been blacklisted. Apparently, after last year's disaster, a no-show booth and several angry customers demanding refunds, the organizers had had enough. But me? I applied under my new brand, Wrench and Rust Restorations. And I didn't just get in. They gave me center booth placement. I invested nearly every spare dollar I had. I bought signage, printed business cards, Built a mobile engine rig so I could do live rebuild demos. Partnered with a coffee truck for cross-promotion. Even got a drone team to shoot footage for a promo trailer. Melissa agreed to help with logistics, and Tina offered to run the booth with me. It was all lining up, but I wasn't done yet. Because the final piece was the property. I drove out to see the landlord of the Taylor & Sons building. A quiet guy named Mr. Costa who'd inherited the property from his father. We'd spoken a few times over the years, mostly about rent checks and minor repairs. I brought him coffee, sat down, and asked a simple question. What would it take to buy the lot? He looked at me for a long moment. You serious? Very. He leaned back. Zach's still there. Not for long. Costa drummed his fingers on the table. I've been waiting for someone to take this place seriously. I got other properties now. If you're offering a clean buyout, I'm listening. And just like that, it became possible. I went home that night and ran the numbers. It would be tight. I'd have to cash out some of my savings. Maybe delay expansion. Maybe take on a small investor. But the idea of owning the land where my grandfather once taught me to change oil for the first time, of reclaiming what was stolen, of building something better right on top of the ashes, that was worth everything. And the best part? They didn't see it coming. Zach was too busy pretending to be a mogul on social media, still posting filtered photos with captions like CEO mode activated and hustle never sleeps. And my father? He hadn't called again. Not since that final voicemail. But I had a feeling he would. Soon. Because when the expo arrived, when the booths went up and the crowds came pouring in, there'd be one name everyone remembered. Not Taylor & Sons, but the one who never needed the name in the first place. And when that moment came, I wouldn't need revenge. I'd have something better. A stage, a story, and the truth on my side. The morning of the Founders Auto Fair felt like a slow heartbeat. Not racing, not frantic. Just steady. I arrived before dawn. The sun hadn't cleared the rooftops yet, and the fairgrounds were still quiet. Vendors setting up tents, hauling in chrome-polished beauties and crate engines like relics. The scent of oil and dust hung in the cool air, and for a moment, it felt like I was 10 again, holding Grandpa's hand, marveling at every Mustang and Chevelle like it was a spaceship. Only now I wasn't a wide-eyed kid in a hoodie. Now I was the main event. Our booth stood right in the center row, bigger than anything I'd ever run. I had banners printed with the Wrench and Rust Restorations logo, a sleek bronze and black design Melissa helped refine. The mobile engine rig was front and center, ready for a live teardown demonstration. Behind it, we had a screen playing time-lapse footage of my recent Camaro rebuild, cut together with subtle branding and a story-driven voiceover. And then the real kicker, a side table lined with framed photos of Grandpa, the old shop, and even one of me and Zach, when we were kids, before the legacy split us. Because this wasn't about erasing the past. It was about showing I remembered everything. Tina arrived at 7:30 sharp with her clipboard and event passes. Melissa showed up 10 minutes later with coffee and a professional smile that hid how deeply personal this was for her too. I brought in the rest of the crew, Sam, 2 new hires, and the trade school kid I'd been mentoring. We all wore matching shirts. Simple. Clean. No names on the back. Just one phrase. Built, not given. By 9 a.m., the crowd poured in. And by 9:07, someone stopped by our booth and said the words I'd waited months to hear. Hey, aren't you the guy from YouTube? It was chaos, in the best way. By noon, we had a constant crowd. People snapping photos, asking about restoration pricing, complimenting the rebuilds and the videos and the brand. I gave interviews to 2 local reporters and one guy with a podcast mic who claimed he had 50,000 subscribers. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I didn't care. I was smiling. And then, just before 2 p.m., I saw them. Zach and my father, standing 50 feet away. Zach was wearing a tailored black button-down, sunglasses perched on his head like he was starring in a cologne commercial. My father was slower, older looking than I remembered. Stooped. Less fire in his walk. Like something in him had finally given out. They weren't there to admire the cars. They were there to see me. We locked eyes. And I didn't flinch. My dad said something to Zach. Zach shook his head and started toward the booth. My crew froze. Tina looked at me like, should we do something? I just gave a small nod and stepped forward to meet him. Mason, Zach said, flashing the fake casual smile I knew too well. Didn't expect to see you here. Funny, I said, voice calm. I was thinking the same. He looked around the booth, took in the banner, the crowd, the line of customers watching the live demo. Nice setup, he said, a little too tightly. Not bad for a backup plan. I smiled. This was the plan. He squinted. You trying to compete with the family business now? Is that what this is? I didn't answer right away. Just let that hang in the air. Then I leaned in a little and said quietly, there's no competition, Zach. Not when one side's already bankrupt. His jaw twitched. Where'd you hear that? I have ears. And friends. You know, people you didn't alienate. He glanced around again, trying to keep his voice even. You know this is low, right? Parading this around like a circus act. Grandstanding. I'm not grandstanding, I said. I'm building. The difference is, I didn't have to tear down a legacy to do it. His face darkened. You think Dad's gonna let this slide? I turned slightly and looked toward our demo engine. I think he doesn't have a choice. And right on cue, like some script written by fate, my dad finally stepped forward. Mason. His voice was low, rough. I turned to face him. We stood there in the middle of the fair. Two men who shared a name and blood and not much else. For a second, he just looked at me. Really looked at me. Not with disappointment. Not with that tired irritation he wore for years. But like he didn't recognize me at all. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, you wanted to talk. Now's your chance. He hesitated. Then nodded. Can we talk in private? I gestured toward the back of the booth, behind the curtain. Tina gave me a discreet thumbs up, keeping the crowd entertained. We stepped out of sight. He ran a hand down his face. I made mistakes, he said. A lot of them. I stayed quiet. I thought I was doing what was best for the business. Preparing Zach. Giving him the tools. I finally spoke. You didn't give him tools. You gave him a crown and no map. And when he got lost, he burned the kingdom. He winced. He told me you left because you didn't want to work under him. I left, I said slowly, because you told me to pack my things. Because you made it clear I was never going to be anything more than a shadow in his spotlight. His mouth tightened. I regret that. Regret isn't a solution. We stood in silence again. Then he said, quietly, he's in over his head. The shop's nearly gone. I can't fix it. I was hoping maybe you could step in. Help right the ship. I blinked. Then laughed, just once. You want me to save it? It's your legacy too, he said. Your grandfather built it for both of you. No, I said. Grandpa built it to last. You handed it to a guy who treated it like a toy. And now it's broken. He swallowed. I'm asking for your help. And I'm saying no. His eyes flinched at that. But I wasn't done. I made my own shop. My own team. I don't need to fix what you destroyed. Then I pulled a small envelope from my jacket pocket and handed it to him. What's this? An offer. He opened it. Read the first line. His eyes widened. You want to buy the building? I already made a deal with Costa, I said. You're months behind on rent. He's done with you. He's willing to sell. All I need is a signature from him, and your voluntary vacate. His hands trembled slightly as he looked up. You're serious. As a heart attack. He looked like he might argue, then stopped. What happens to Zach? I shrugged. He'll land somewhere. Guys like him always do. Maybe he can run a YouTube channel about how to fake success in 6 months or less. Dad exhaled. You're not even angry. No, I said. I was. But anger fades when you realize you've already won. He nodded slowly. So this is revenge. No, I said. This is freedom. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was finalized. Costa sold me the building for less than it was worth, mostly because he hated dealing with unpaid tenants. Zach's LLC quietly folded. The Taylor Performance Instagram vanished. The sign on the front of the building came down, and a new one went up. Same location, same garage doors, but a new name. Wrench and Rust, Legacy Division. We kept the old photos on the wall, even one of Dad and Grandpa, back when they built their first Mustang together. Because I wasn't erasing history. I was honoring the parts that mattered. Word got around fast. Mr. Hawkins brought his Fairlane in the same week. The trade school sent me 2 apprentices. We launched a new series called Legacy Restorations and booked 6 months' worth of builds in a month. As for Zach, last I heard, he was trying to sell a course on garage branding and growth. No one's biting. He texted me once. Congrats. You win. I never responded. And my father? He came by once. Stood outside. Watched me work. Didn't say anything. Just nodded. Then walked away. It was enough. Because in the end, I didn't need his words. I had something better. I had peace. And I had a shop full of engines humming in harmony, grease under my nails, and a name on the sign that finally meant something again. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I built it. And this time, it was mine. I was 32 when I realized that being the good son in my family didn't mean anything unless you were the favorite. My name's Peter, and for most of my life, I thought if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed out of drama, my parents would eventually see me the way they saw my sister, Chloe. I was wrong. They didn't just prefer her, they worshipped her. She could set fire to the living room, and they'd say, "She's just creative." I once broke a plate, and Mom said it symbolized my lack of focus. That pretty much sums up the dynamic. Growing up, Chloe was the golden child, the miracle daughter after years of trying. I was the unplanned follow-up, the quiet kid who built Lego sets alone while she performed cartwheels for applause. She got ballet lessons, summer camps, private tutors, a car for her 17th birthday. I got hand-me-downs, half apologies, and a lecture about how gratitude builds character. Dad used to tell people that Chloe would make something of herself and that I liked to tinker. When I got a scholarship to study mechanical engineering, he told me not to get cocky because everyone gets lucky once. After college, I worked my way up at a manufacturing firm, nothing glamorous, but honest work. Chloe, meanwhile, burned through jobs like matches. She went from art school dropout to wellness influencer to spiritual consultant, whatever that means. My parents always bailed her out, always believed her next venture was the one. They even remortgaged their house once to fund her eco-friendly candle business. Those candles ended up in their basement, collecting dust next to boxes of unpaid invoices. Despite it all, I visited often. I'd fix Dad's car, mow the lawn, replace their old water heater, stuff Chloe wasn't built for. Every time, Mom would brag about Chloe's latest achievement, like her 12,000 Instagram followers, then look at me and ask if I'd met anyone serious yet. The truth was, I didn't bring anyone home because my last girlfriend had overheard Mom calling her another charity project. I just stopped trying. Then Grandpa passed away. He was the only one who ever treated me like an equal. He'd been quiet and sharp, a man of few words but deep eyes. He was Dad's father, and the two of them never got along. Grandpa thought Dad had gone soft after marrying Mom, said she ran the house like a CEO. I spent most summers at Grandpa's place as a kid, helping him repair tractors, fix fences, and build furniture in his barn workshop. When I was little, he'd say, "You've got the patience of a craftsman, Pete." That's rare. I didn't realize how much that meant until much later. The funeral was strange. Small, efficient, and cold, just like Dad wanted. He didn't want a show. Chloe showed up 2 hours late, wearing sunglasses and holding an iced coffee, claiming she had a migraine from crying. I barely recognized her. Designer coat, long fake nails, the kind of detached confidence that comes from never facing consequences. She hugged me briefly, whispered, "Let's just get this over with," and spent the rest of the service scrolling on her phone. After the burial, the lawyer handling Grandpa's estate called to schedule the will reading. He said Grandpa had left behind a few specific requests, including a sealed letter to be opened in front of the family. Mom rolled her eyes when she heard that. "Always the dramatics," she muttered. But I felt something twist in my gut, a mix of grief and curiosity. Grandpa wasn't the type to waste words. If he'd written a letter, it meant something. The day of the will reading, we met in the lawyer's office downtown. The place smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Mom was dressed like she was attending a gala. Pearl earrings, expensive perfume, that icy smile she saved for public appearances. Dad had his arms crossed, impatient as ever. Chloe looked bored, clicking her nails on the table, sipping a latte she'd smuggled in. The lawyer, a calm man named Mr. Henderson, sat across from us, adjusting his glasses. He gave a polite smile and opened a leather folder. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, your father left behind a detailed will and an accompanying letter." Mom waved her hand. "Let's just get to it. I assume the estate will go to us, as usual." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, there are specific allocations." He paused, reading. "To his daughter-in-law, Margaret, that's Mom, he leaves the antique china set and the family piano." Mom smiled, though her eyes flickered briefly with disappointment. "To his son, Robert, Dad, he leaves his coin collection, valued at approximately $60,000, and his vintage pickup truck." Dad grunted approval, nodding slightly. Then Henderson looked up at Chloe, who was already fixing her hair in her reflection. To his granddaughter, Chloe, he leaves the remainder of his liquid assets, totaling $6.7 million. Chloe gasped. Wait, what? She turned to Mom, who beamed like she'd just won an award. See, sweetheart, Grandpa knew your worth, she whispered. I stayed quiet, my hands folded, waiting for my name. And to his grandson, Peter, Henderson paused. I'll never forget the pause. It was long enough for Mom to smirk and for Dad to mutter, "Here we go." Henderson continued. He leaves $1. The room went still. Dad let out a laugh, sharp, condescending. Guess someone needed a lesson in humility, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Mom added, maybe now you'll learn some responsibility, Peter. You were always the disappointment anyway. Chloe just smiled, that smug little tilt of her head. Don't take it personally, Pete. It's not your fault he liked me more. I didn't say anything. My throat felt tight. It wasn't even about the money. It was the message. $1. Like I was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Henderson adjusted his glasses again, but he didn't close the folder. There is one more item, he said carefully. A sealed letter your grandfather instructed me to read aloud, only after the will had been fully disclosed. Mom frowned. What for? He already made it clear. But Henderson ignored her and opened the envelope. The paper inside was old and slightly yellowed, Grandpa's neat handwriting covering both sides. He began to read. Robert, Margaret, and my grandchildren. If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and hopefully somewhere quieter than that house of yours. Henderson hesitated briefly, then continued. I've lived long enough to see who each of you really are. Robert, you've spent your life trying to please your wife and outdo your neighbors. You forgot what it meant to work for something, to build with your hands, to teach your children by example instead of by lecture. Margaret, you've poisoned every relationship around you with your pride. You turned love into a competition and my son into a stranger. Mom stiffened. This is ridiculous, she said. But Henderson went on. As for Chloe, I hope the money brings you happiness, because nothing else ever will if you don't learn what honesty means. You have your mother's charm and your father's carelessness, a dangerous mix. Chloe scoffed. He's just bitter. And Peter, Henderson read, his voice softening. If you're sitting there quietly, don't. You have the kindest heart of all of them, and that's why they've treated you the way they have. They mistake goodness for weakness. But I haven't forgotten what you've done for me. The summers fixing fences, the times you came without being asked, the respect you showed without expecting a thing in return. I once told you patience is a craftsman's virtue. Now you'll see why. Henderson stopped reading for a moment, looked at me, and said, There's a postscript addressed only to you, Peter. He asked that I hand it to you personally after this reading. Mom's face twitched. What's that supposed to mean? Henderson didn't answer. He handed me a smaller envelope, sealed with red wax. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Dad finally broke the silence. Don't get your hopes up. Probably just another $1 inside. But for the first time that day, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was curiosity, heavy and electric. Grandpa had never been a man of empty gestures. If he'd left me a single dollar and a secret letter, there was a reason. I slid my thumb under the seal. Mom leaned forward. Chloe crossed her arms. Henderson gave a small nod. Inside was a single line, written in that familiar steady script. And when I read it, my stomach dropped. Whatever I thought this was, it was something much, much bigger. I didn't read the note out loud. Not right away. My fingers shook slightly as I folded it closed and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Mom's eyes followed the movement like a hawk tracking prey. Well, she demanded. What does it say? I looked at her. It's private, I said quietly. Her face twitched. Private? Don't be ridiculous, Peter. We're family. Exactly, I replied, my voice steady now. And Grandpa said it's for me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dad snorted, pushing back his chair. Oh, stop being dramatic. It's probably some sentimental nonsense. The old man was losing it at the end. Mr. Henderson raised a hand, calm as ever. Actually, Mr. Whitaker was of sound mind when he signed these documents. He insisted on every word. That seemed to shut Dad up, at least temporarily. But Mom was still glaring at me, her lips pursed tight. Chloe leaned back. twirling her hair with one manicured finger, her tone mock sympathetic. Ah, maybe it's a little note saying how proud he is of you. Or maybe he's apologizing for, well, you know. For what? I asked, though I already knew she'd enjoy spelling it out. For realizing you'd never be me, she said with a fake sweet smile. It's okay, Pete. Some people are just meant to support others. I didn't answer. I stood up, thanked Mr. Henderson, and told him I'd call later. I could hear Dad grumbling something about ungrateful kids as I walked out. The cool air outside felt like a slap. I sat in my car for a while, just staring at the folded paper in my hand. Finally, I unfolded it again. The message was short, just 9 words. The dollar isn't the gift. Look beneath the roots. Beneath the roots. For a moment, I thought he was being poetic, maybe metaphorical. But then I remembered something. The oak tree. The one behind his farmhouse. The one we'd planted together when I was 9. He used to call it our marker. Every year, he'd make me measure how tall it had grown. When I asked him once why it mattered, he said, because someday, it'll matter to you more than to me. I didn't understand then, but I did now. I drove straight to the farm. It wasn't far, just an hour from the city, down winding roads lined with old fences and rusted mailboxes. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling and the porch sagging slightly. It had been empty since his passing, though legally, it now belonged to Chloe, at least on paper. The key still worked. Inside, everything was exactly the same. The smell of old wood and tobacco. The dusty bookshelf full of history books. His worn recliner still faced the same window overlooking the oak tree. I stood there for a long moment, then went outside, the letter still in my hand. The oak had grown tall and thick, its roots sprawling under the soil. I walked around it slowly, scanning the ground. There, a small patch near the base where the earth looked disturbed, slightly looser than the rest. My heart began to race. I fetched a shovel from the shed and started digging. After maybe half an hour, the shovel hit something hard. A small metal box. My breath caught. I pulled it out and brushed off the dirt. There was no lock, just a latch. Inside were a few folded documents, yellowed and crisp, and one more note in Grandpa's handwriting. Peter, if you found this, you've earned it. Everything else was a distraction. You know better than anyone that what's real isn't always what shines. I trust you'll know what to do. Grandpa. Underneath the letter were property deeds, several of them. I scanned the names, my pulse pounding harder with each one. 3 parcels of land, totaling hundreds of acres, spread across the outskirts of town. Not small lots, either. Farmland, forests, one even near a river bend that had been sought after by developers for years. And every single one was signed over to me. Quietly, privately, without my parents' knowledge. I sank down beside the box, my hands trembling. Grandpa hadn't left me $1. He'd left me everything that mattered. But I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. I closed the box, put everything back, and buried it again, just in case. Then I sat on the porch until the sun began to set, thinking. That night, I drove back to my apartment, exhausted but wired, my mind spinning with possibilities. Grandpa had been deliberate. The public humiliation, the dollar, was part of something bigger. He knew my parents' greed. He knew Chloe's entitlement. He wanted them to show their true colors first. And they were already starting to. The next few weeks were tense. Mom called often, pretending to check in. Every call started with fake concern and ended with subtle jabs. So, Peter, have you found a new job yet? I still have my old one, Mom. Oh, right. The factory thing. Must be nice to have so little stress. Dad chimed in occasionally, usually to criticize. You should be learning something from your sister. She's launching a brand line now. Candles didn't work, but this new one's solid, essential oils, or something. I just nodded along. I didn't bother explaining that Chloe's brand was already floundering again. Grandpa's funeral had sparked her temporary fame online, but it fizzled fast. Still, she acted like she'd inherited the throne. When the local paper published an article about the family estate, technically part of Grandpa's holdings, Chloe gave interviews about her vision for modernization. She posted photos of herself in front of his farmhouse, captioned, "Honoring the legacy with a new beginning." I felt sick. It wasn't even that I wanted the money. I just couldn't stand the erasure of who Grandpa really was. He hated fake grandeur. He built things with his hands, repaired his own tractor at 80 years old, refused to sell his land to corporations no matter how high the offers got. And now, Chloe was using his name to sell overpriced heritage wellness packages. But I stayed quiet, at least for the time being. Then one morning, I got an email from Mr. Henderson. He wanted to meet. When I arrived, he looked both cautious and impressed. "Peter," he said, closing the door behind me. "I assume you found the letter?" I nodded slowly. "And the contents beneath the roots?" I hesitated. "You knew about that?" He smiled faintly. "Your grandfather was meticulous. He told me everything. But he also instructed me not to reveal anything until you'd proven you could handle it." "Handle what exactly?" I asked. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were appraisals and updated records. My jaw slackened when I saw the total value. The land Grandpa left me was worth more than double what Chloe had inherited. I stared at the numbers, then at Henderson. "Why didn't he just put this in the will?" "Because he knew your family," Henderson said simply. "If they thought you had money, they'd come for it. This way you have time. Control. Leverage. Leverage." That word stuck in my head for days. And sure enough, my parents came knocking soon after, figuratively first, then literally. Mom invited me to dinner to reconnect. I almost didn't go, but part of me wanted to see how far this would go. The moment I stepped into their house, I knew it wasn't about reconnecting. The dining table was set with wine glasses and printed brochures. Yes, brochures. Chloe stood there in a crisp, white blazer, smiling like a politician. "Petey," she chirped. "We were just talking about you." Mom clasped her hands together. "Your sister has a wonderful business proposal. We think you could be part of it." I sat down slowly. "Part of what?" Chloe slid one of the brochures over to me. It was titled Whitaker Heritage Retreat, a Family Legacy Experience. I blinked. "What is this?" She leaned forward, excited. "It's a destination retreat. Yoga, meditation, farm-to-table dining, all on Grandpa's property. The land's already mine, so I'll handle ownership. You just help with logistics. You know, construction, maintenance, stuff you're good at." "In other words," I said flatly, "I'd work for you." Chloe smiled wider. "Well, if you want to put it that way. But hey, you'd be part of something meaningful." Dad raised his glass. "You could use a purpose, son. It's not healthy living alone, tinkering with machines." Mom nodded. "And it's the least you can do after everything Chloe's done for this family." I stared at them, feeling that same tightness in my chest as I had at the will reading. The old patterns were back, condescension disguised as kindness, manipulation wrapped in smiles. I stood up. "No, thanks," I said simply. Chloe's smile faltered. "Excuse me. I'm not interested in working for you." Mom's eyes narrowed. "Peter, don't be ungrateful. She's offering you an opportunity." "An opportunity," I repeated, "to build her empire while she takes the credit." Dad slammed his glass down. "Enough of that tone. You'll help your sister, or don't bother showing your face here again." I didn't argue. I just nodded once, turned, and walked out. That was the night I decided I'd had enough. But walking away didn't mean staying silent forever. Grandpa had trusted me with something powerful, something my parents had no idea existed. And as I watched them twist his legacy into something fake, something selfish, I realized exactly what he'd meant by leverage. They thought they'd humiliated me with $1. They had no idea what was coming. It started small, just whispers at first. Friends of the family would mention things that didn't add up. A former farmhand called me one night asking if I'd approved the bulldozer work near the riverbank. I had no idea what he was talking about. "Your sister said you signed off on it," he told me. "Said you two were partners now." I remember sitting there, frozen, the phone pressed to my ear while he described how trucks had rolled in to clear space for cabins. Cabins on Grandpa's land. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately drove out there. The moment I saw the churned-up soil, the tree stumps, and the spray-painted wooden stakes marking Lot A, Lot B, parking, I felt something inside me crack. Chloe had crossed a line, but not just her. There were tire marks all over the property, fresh construction tape tied around fence posts, and a laminated notice nailed to the oak tree itself. My oak tree. Our oak tree. It read, "Whitaker Heritage Retreat, Development in Progress. Project Manager, Chloe Whitaker." I just stood there, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. She hadn't even called. No message, no warning, nothing. Just bulldozed the one thing Grandpa and I built together. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. her voice dripping with cheerfulness. "Hey, Petey. Long time, what's up?" "Don't hey Petey me," I snapped. "What are you doing on the farm?" Silence for a beat. Then a sigh. "Oh, that. You saw it already, huh?" "Already." I nearly laughed. "You didn't even ask me. You didn't tell anyone." She clicked her tongue. "Relax, Pete. It's just some preliminary groundwork. We're expanding the retreat space. Dad's idea, actually. He said it's time to use the land for something productive." "The land isn't yours to do that with," I said quietly. "Excuse me. I mean legally, Chloe. You inherited the house and liquid assets, not the property Grandpa bought later. Those weren't in the will." Her tone shifted immediately. "Are you seriously pulling that right now?" "He left me the estate, Peter. That includes everything." "No," I said, "it doesn't. And you know it doesn't." She laughed. Light, cruel. "You really think you can fight me on this? Come on, little brother. Don't embarrass yourself." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. The next day, I drove to Mr. Henderson's office with photos of the property damage. He confirmed what I already knew. The land she was touching wasn't hers. Grandpa had transferred it directly to me through private deeds years earlier. "She's trespassing, Peter," Henderson said, frowning. "You have every legal right to stop her." I nodded slowly. "Not yet." He looked confused. "Not yet. She thinks she's invincible," I said. "Let her dig deeper." Because if there was one thing I'd learned about my family, it was that greed never stopped halfway. It always wanted more. And the more they took, the easier it would be to expose them later. But what I didn't anticipate was how low they'd go next. A week later, I got a notice in the mail, an official one. A petition to invalidate Grandpa's private transfers. It was filed by none other than my parents. According to the document, they claimed I'd manipulated an elderly man into rewriting his estate. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading the words over and over, my jaw tightening until I could hear my teeth grind. Manipulated. They were accusing me of taking advantage of him, the man they barely visited, the man they mocked for being stuck in the past. The petition included a statement from Chloe, too. She'd sworn, under oath, that Grandpa had intended all assets to belong to the main branch of the family. Meaning her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in the dark staring at the ceiling, wondering how the same people who raised me could twist reality so easily. I thought about all the times I'd helped Dad fix his roof, all the weekends I spent cleaning their garage, or bailing Chloe out of her failed ventures. Every memory of goodwill now felt like a bruise. Then came the phone call that broke whatever trust one still had left. Mom. She called late, around 11 p.m. Her voice was softer than usual, almost gentle. "Peter, honey, I just wanted to talk." I didn't answer. "You know your father's upset about this lawsuit nonsense. We didn't want to take it there, but you forced our hand. By existing?" I said quietly. She sighed. "Don't be dramatic. You're always so sensitive. Look, you know how these things work. Your grandfather was old, confused. He didn't understand what he was signing. Chloe deserves that land. She's going to make something wonderful out of it. And what about me? You? Oh, Peter." She laughed softly, like she was comforting a child. "You've never been interested in business or family matters. You're not built for it. You'd waste that land just like you wasted your chances. This way, it stays in the family." "In the family?" I repeated, my voice flat. "You mean in her hands?" She hesitated, then said something that still rings in my ears to this day. "Sometimes, the better child needs more to do more." I hung up. I didn't yell, didn't argue. Just quietly ended the call and stared out my window until the sky turned gray. The next morning, I went to the property again. The place looked even worse. Half the field torn up, trenches dug where wildflowers used to grow. Construction trucks were parked everywhere. Workers I didn't recognize moved around like ants, following orders barked by a man in a bright vest. I walked straight to him. "Who's in charge here?" He looked at me suspiciously. "You the surveyor?" "No, I'm the owner." He frowned. "Lady named Chloe Whitaker hired us. She doesn't own this land." He laughed, assuming I was joking. "Then you better take it up with her. We've been paid." I stood there, breathing hard, trying to decide whether to shout or just walk away. Instead, I took pictures, everything I could. Then I went home and printed them out. That night, Dad called. He didn't even bother pretending to be civil. "You're making a fool of yourself," he said immediately. "We already told the lawyers to handle this. You'll drop your nonsense and sign the release form." "No." His voice hardened. You think you can fight us? You don't have the money or the spine, Peter. You've always been too soft. Maybe, I said. But you should know something, Dad. Grandpa wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. Don't test me, boy, he snapped. You'll regret it. Then came the click. A week later, the betrayal became complete. I came home from work one afternoon and found my apartment door ajar. Inside, drawers were open, papers scattered, my desk overturned. My stomach dropped as I realized what was missing, the metal box. The one I dug up from beneath the oak tree. The deeds. The letters. Gone. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I checked the locks. No sign of forced entry. Whoever had done this had used a key. My spare was gone too. I drove straight to my parents' house. No plan, just fury. When Mom opened the door, her expression was eerily calm. Peter, she said, you shouldn't come here unannounced. Where is it? I demanded. Where's what? The box. The deeds. She smiled faintly. I don't know what you're talking about. Then I heard footsteps behind her. Chloe appeared, holding a mug, dressed in one of those silk robes she wore when she wanted to feel superior. Looking for something? She asked, and her tone told me everything. You broke into my place, I said. She shrugged. You really should lock your windows. I stepped forward, my pulse pounding. That's theft, Chloe. No, Mom interrupted. It's correction. We're taking back what shouldn't have been yours in the first place. My voice came out quieter than I expected. You stole from me. Mom didn't flinch. You stole from your sister's future first. That's when I realized it. There was no misunderstanding, no miscommunication. They planned this. From the will reading to the construction, to the lawsuit, to this. They'd always planned to take everything back. I looked at them both, really looked. Mom with her calm cruelty. Chloe with her smug smile. And behind them, the faint sound of Dad's TV from the living room. Football, as if nothing else in the world mattered. I turned to leave. Peter, Mom called as I reached the door. You might as well stop fighting. The lawyers already have everything they need. Just sign the transfer and move on. I didn't answer. But as I walked out into the cold night air, one thought cut through the chaos like a blade. Grandpa had known. He'd seen this coming. And if he'd trusted me with that land, he must have trusted that I'd know how to protect it. The betrayal hurt, yes, but it also clarified something. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about legacy, about truth, about finally ending the cycle of control that had defined my family for decades. And I wasn't going to play nice anymore. For a long time after that night, everything around me felt hollow. I'd always known my family didn't care about fairness, but seeing it this naked, watching them rip the last piece of Grandpa's memory away from me, broke something deeper. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I went to work, fixed machines, nodded through meetings, and drove home to silence. My phone buzzed with missed calls, Mom, Dad, Chloe, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I knew exactly what they wanted. Submission, the kind that came disguised as reconciliation. The box was gone. The original deeds, too. And without those, my leverage was gone. Henderson did his best to reassure me, saying copies existed at the county office, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. My parents had money, connections, and time. I had exhaustion. The worst part wasn't the loss itself, it was the isolation. Friends who once sympathized with me began to fade away, unsure which version of the story to believe. Chloe had gone online again, posting filtered photos in front of the half-finished Whitaker Heritage Retreat. Her captions were perfectly curated, turning Grandpa's dream into something beautiful, carrying on the family legacy with love and purpose. The comments made me sick. Hundreds of strangers called her inspiring, humble, a true visionary. No one knew the truth. They didn't see the lies, the theft, the manipulation. It was all hidden under soft light and fake smiles. Then came the lawsuit hearing. It was early February, gray and wet, and I remember walking into the courthouse with my stomach twisted into knots. My parents were already inside, sitting beside Chloe. They didn't look nervous. They looked comfortable, like they owned the place. Mom even had the nerve to wave when she saw me. During the hearing, their lawyer, a slick man with a rehearsed smirk, laid out their story like a polished play. He painted me as a confused, resentful son who'd taken advantage of an elderly man's declining mental state. He said Grandpa was lonely and easily influenced, that I'd inserted myself into estate matters beyond my authority. I wanted to shout, to tell the judge about the summers I'd spent by Grandpa's side, the hours in his workshop, the conversations about ethics and patience and craftsmanship. But the courtroom wasn't made for emotion. It was made for presentation. And they had all the polish in the world. When my turn came, I spoke plainly. I told the truth. Henderson presented the copies of the deeds, verified and notarized. But as soon as the opposing lawyer began poking holes, why weren't they included in the main will? Why was the box hidden? I could feel the doubt creeping in. The judge didn't make a ruling that day. He said it would require review. But the damage was already done. My parents walked past me on their way out, triumphant. Chloe smiled that practiced smile and whispered, "You really thought you could win, didn't you?" I drove home that night through heavy rain, gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands cramped. When I got to my apartment, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, soaked and shaking. For the first time in years, I cried. Not the kind of crying that asks for comfort, the quiet, hopeless kind that empties you out. I started to believe maybe they were right. Maybe I was the weak one, the one who tried to do everything right only to end up with nothing. For days, I couldn't eat. I'd wake up with my jaw clenched and a dull ache behind my eyes. Henderson called to check on me, but I barely answered. He said he'd keep fighting, that the truth would surface eventually. But it didn't feel like truth mattered. It never had in my family. They'd always been better at rewriting the story. Then, one evening, I saw something that snapped me out of it. Chloe was on local TV. An interview. She was sitting in the farmhouse, Grandpa's farmhouse, looking poised, radiant, wearing a cream blazer and gold jewelry. Behind her, I could see the oak tree through the window. The reporter was asking about the new development. "Your grandfather must be proud, seeing his land transformed this way." Chloe smiled. "Oh, absolutely. He told me before he passed that he always dreamed of seeing this place flourish. I'm just making that dream real." I felt the blood drain from my face. He never said that. He said the opposite. He said never sell to anyone who speaks in promises. I turned off the TV, sat back, and stared at the ceiling. That's when it hit me. They didn't just take from me. They were rewriting him. His memory, his principles, everything he stood for. And if I let them, he'd be remembered as a man who supported her lies. Something in me hardened that night. The sadness didn't vanish, but it shifted into something sharper, resolve. I wasn't going to fight them with rage or desperation anymore. That never worked. My parents thrived on emotion. It made them stronger. No, I needed to think like Grandpa. Patiently, quietly, strategically. So I started to plan. The first thing I did was visit the farmhouse again, this time late at night when the construction crews were gone. I parked down the road and walked the rest of the way, flashlight in hand. The property looked like a ghost of itself. Half-built cabins, steel frames, and bulldozed earth. But when I got closer to the oak tree, something strange caught my eye. There were still roots exposed from where the soil had been moved. And buried in the mess was something metal. Not large, just the corner of a small box. My heart thudded as I crouched down and dug it out with my hands. It wasn't the same one as before. This one was smaller, rusted, and sealed tight. Inside was a key. A simple brass key with the initials RW etched on it, Grandpa's initials. There was also a note, water-stained but still legible. "If they take what's yours, look where they never think to look." I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But I felt something spark again. A puzzle. A trail. The next morning, I took the key to Henderson. He examined it carefully. "RW," he murmured. "Do you know what it unlocks?" "No," I said. "But I think I need to find out." He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, Peter, he clearly trusted only you to find it." Over the next few weeks, I kept my distance from everyone. My parents sent another letter through their lawyer, demanding I stop interfering with the retreat project. Chloe, meanwhile, was doing promotional shoots, hosting influencers at the partially finished property, posting quotes about gratitude and legacy. Every photo made my chest ache. Every smile she faked was another reminder that she'd taken everything. I started driving aimlessly after work. Long drives through back roads, places Grandpa and I used to go. I'd park by the river sometimes, just sitting there in the quiet, the key in my pocket, turning it over in my fingers like a habit. Then, one night, I remembered something. When I was a kid, Grandpa had a storage unit in town, an old one, near the rail yard. He kept scrap metal and spare parts there, or so he said. Once, when I asked him about it, He winked and said, "That place holds more than rust, Pete." At the time, I thought he meant sentimental junk. But what if it was something else? The next morning, I went there. The facility was half empty, most of the doors rusted and unlabeled. I walked through the rows until I saw it. Unit 47, faintly marked with RW in fading paint. My hands shook as I tried the key. It slid in perfectly. When the door creaked open, a wave of dust hit me. Inside were boxes, neatly labeled, stacked to the ceiling. Tools, blueprints, folders, even old ledgers. And on the far wall, a large, covered frame leaned against the concrete. I pulled the tarp away and froze. It was a detailed map of the land. Not just Grandpa's property, but everything around it. The boundaries, the underground water systems, the zoning lines. And at the bottom corner, a signature block with the county seal. He hadn't just owned farmland. He'd quietly acquired the mineral rights beneath it. That's when it all clicked. The roots. The beneath. He wasn't just being poetic. He'd hidden something real, something far more valuable than money. I stood there for a long time, my head spinning. Then I laughed, quiet, incredulous laughter that turned into something close to tears. Grandpa had known they'd take the obvious, so he'd buried the real treasure underneath it all. Still, even with that knowledge, I wasn't ready to fight yet. I didn't know how. My parents were still in control of the narrative. I was still the bitter son. And legally, the process could take months, maybe years. So I waited, worked, saved. The world kept moving. Chloe's retreat opened for soft visits. Photos of the cabins started popping up online. Fake rustic, over-designed, soulless. Mom gave interviews, too, always emphasizing family unity. Dad stayed in the background, letting them bask in attention. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible. I started visiting the storage unit quietly, documenting everything, scanning records, organizing files. Piece by piece, I was building something they couldn't see, a foundation of proof, not emotion. But even with the small sense of control returning, I still felt like I was standing at the bottom of a well, looking up at the faintest light. The betrayal had hollowed me out. Nights were the hardest. That's when the voices came back. "You'll never win, Peter. You're too soft. She deserves more." Sometimes I'd wake up gripping my phone, mid-draft of a message to Mom that I never sent. Sometimes I'd replay Grandpa's words in my head. "Patience is a craftsman's virtue," and try to believe them. Piece by piece, something inside me began to shift from pain to purpose. That spring, something inside me finally began to thaw. The grief was still there, tucked deep behind my ribs, but it no longer paralyzed me. It fueled me. I started each morning early, coffee, a notebook, and my laptop open to the growing folder of files I'd gathered from Grandpa's storage unit. I spent hours cross-referencing deeds, mineral rights, purchase agreements, and maps. What I uncovered was astonishing. Grandpa hadn't just owned a few parcels of land. Over the course of 30 years, he'd quietly acquired overlapping tracts that extended far beyond what anyone thought. Miles of forest, a stream system, and several abandoned quarries registered under a holding company he'd set up decades ago, RW Resources, LLC. The discovery hit me like a second inheritance, one I didn't even know existed. The papers showed that not only did I legally own the farmland Chloe had built on, but I also held the subsurface rights beneath her retreat. In simple terms, she could build all the cabins she wanted, but she couldn't legally claim ownership of what lay under them. That was leverage. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt power shift in my direction. I took time to rebuild myself quietly. I started jogging in the mornings again, something I hadn't done since college. I picked up woodworking, something Grandpa had taught me as a kid, and began restoring old furniture in my garage on weekends. It became my therapy. Every piece I sanded and stained reminded me of how Grandpa worked. Patient, deliberate, never rushing a cut. Meanwhile, I started looking at my career differently too. I'd always worked as a mechanical engineer at a mid-level manufacturing firm, steady, modest, predictable. But for the first time, I saw opportunities everywhere. I had ideas for designs, for efficiency models I'd kept in notebooks for years but never pursued. So I stayed up late, coding simulations and building prototypes, pouring the anger into precision. Within months, one of my designs, a compact irrigation pump system meant for rural areas, caught attention online after I posted a demo video. A small agricultural tech company reached out, interested in licensing it. The deal wasn't huge, but it was enough to give me breathing room. I quit my old job and started my own small consultancy. The timing felt poetic. While my family flaunted their retreat, I was building something real from the ground up, just like Grandpa had. Then something strange happened. Developers started contacting me. Apparently, the region around the farm was becoming valuable. A highway expansion had been approved nearby, and companies were quietly scouting for land with water access and mineral potential. One company sent an email asking about leasing rights for a quarry site listed under RW Resources. My heart jumped. They didn't know it was me. They just saw the LLC. I met with Mr. Henderson immediately. He nearly laughed when he saw the message. "Peter, this is bigger than you think," he said, flipping through the documents. "If you play this right, you could turn what your grandfather left into a long-term income stream. And more importantly, you can make sure your sister's project stays under your legal thumb." That last part mattered, because while I'd been rebuilding, Chloe had been expanding. Her Whitaker Heritage Retreat had gone viral on social media. Influencers were visiting, corporate wellness programs were booking retreats, and magazines were calling her the visionary granddaughter continuing a family legacy. Mom handled PR, Dad managed finances, and they'd built the perfect illusion of success. The truth? The retreat was already bleeding money. I found out when I stumbled across a local contractor's complaint online. Apparently, Chloe had refused to pay for half of the plumbing work, claiming budget discrepancies. Curious, I looked deeper: public business records, debt filings, and unpaid contractor listings. The retreat was surviving on loans and sponsorship deals, not profit. Still, they presented it as an empire. Photo shoots, ribbon cuttings, smiling family portraits in glossy magazines. My parents looked proud again, radiant even. It made my stomach twist, but also sharpened my resolve. Because now, I had something they didn't: proof, time, and ownership of the ground beneath their empire. I started visiting the farm again, this time openly. The construction workers were mostly gone by then, replaced by maintenance crews and landscaping teams. Chloe wasn't there the first few times I came, but word got around quickly that I'd been seen on the property. A week later, I got a call. "Peter." Chloe's voice was ice. "Why are you showing up at my retreat?" "Checking on my land," I said evenly. She laughed bitterly. "Your land? You really need to drop this fantasy before it gets pathetic. You should probably read your lease agreements more carefully," I said. "Might notice something about mineral rights and subterranean claims." There was a pause, just long enough to make me smile. Then she said, "You're bluffing." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you're building a multi-million-dollar business on top of something you don't own." That was the last thing I heard before she hung up. For the next month, the calls from their lawyers started again, this time more polite, less aggressive. They wanted to clarify boundaries and avoid unnecessary escalation. That's when I knew I had them rattled. Henderson advised me not to rush. "Let them sweat," he said. "Greed always trips over itself." So I waited and focused on growth. My business was thriving. By summer, I'd signed 2 new clients and hired an assistant. The prototype I'd sold earlier was being tested for a state grant program. The local paper even featured a short piece about Whitaker Engineering, a small-town success story helping farmers modernize irrigation. I didn't seek attention, but it found me. Funny thing, Mom must have seen it. She texted me one morning for the first time in months. "Mom, saw your little article. Glad you're finally doing something useful. Maybe now you can contribute to the family business again." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Me? You mean the one built on my land?" She didn't respond. Later that week, I got a message from Chloe herself. It was a single line, no greeting. "Chloe, you're not going to win, Peter. You never do." But she was wrong. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was building something sustainable, something real. And for once, my life didn't revolve around their approval or attention. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Their pride wouldn't let them back down. That autumn, I decided to take things further. I hired a geological surveyor to officially document the underground assets tied to my mineral rights. What they found confirmed everything: valuable stone deposits, high-quality clay, and a spring system that could supply water for decades. The report was irrefutable. When I told Henderson, he smiled like a man watching a chess match unfold exactly as planned. "Do you realize what this means?" he said. "If they continue construction or profit from this land without your permission, they're violating property law. Then we'll wait, I said. And we did. Weeks passed. The retreat kept operating, oblivious to the legal trap beneath it. Guests arrived. Photos circulated. And then, one evening, a friend sent me a video from social media, an influencer live streaming at the retreat. In the background, I could clearly see one of the cabins built right over the mapped spring. That was it. The moment of proof. I contacted Henderson that night. We filed an injunction. It wasn't an act of revenge, it was justice. Still, as the case moved forward, I kept my distance emotionally. I didn't announce it, didn't gloat. I just kept working, quietly thriving, while the cracks in their empire widened. Contractors demanded payment. The bank reduced their credit line. Local rumors started spreading that the Whitaker retreat was built on disputed land. For once, I didn't need to defend myself. The truth was defending me. One morning, months later, I visited the oak tree again. It was colder then, leaves falling, ground damp with frost. I placed my hand on the bark, feeling the rough grooves beneath my fingers. The tree had grown thicker, stronger. It had survived storms, drought, time, and now greed. I remember whispering, "I'm getting there, Grandpa." Because I was. My business had doubled in income by winter. My apartment had become a small home. I'd made new friends, real ones, people who didn't see me as the quiet failure of the family, but as someone who built something honest. And yet, deep down, I knew there was still one thing left undone. The retreat, the family, the illusion. They hadn't learned anything yet. Not Mom with her sharp smiles, not Dad with his empty pride, not Chloe with her endless need to prove she was chosen. And soon enough, I realized I wouldn't have to confront them myself. The confrontation would come to me. It always did. Winter came early that year. The air had that sharp, metallic chill that made every sound echo farther than it should, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the quiet that came with it. My life had changed so much since the last time I'd stood on that land. I wasn't the uncertain, hesitant son anymore, the one who bit his tongue and waited for scraps of respect. I was calm, patient, deliberate. I finally understood what Grandpa meant when he said, "Don't shout when you can let silence do the heavy lifting." By December, my company had grown beyond what I ever expected. The irrigation system I designed was now being tested for municipal use, and I'd landed a government contract to retrofit outdated rural equipment. It was modest but steady, enough to hire 2 more employees and move into a small office on the edge of town. The same town where the Whitaker Heritage Retreat sat gleaming like a false crown. That retreat had become a full-blown spectacle. A new website, a rebranding campaign, and a flurry of press coverage had turned Chloe into a minor celebrity. She'd started giving TED-style talks about family values and perseverance. I didn't know whether to laugh or to be impressed at her ability to twist every truth into a personal victory. Mom managed the books, Dad handled public relations, and together, they'd convinced half the county that the Whitakers were the picture of harmony. But beneath the polished facade, the cracks were widening. I knew it. Henderson sent me regular updates on the injunction. The legal gears turned slowly, but they turned. Chloe had responded with her typical arrogance, counterclaims, public denials, and statements about paperwork confusion. But the evidence was irrefutable. The mineral rights, the water source, the zoning violations, all of it pointed to one conclusion. They were standing on property they didn't own and drawing profits from it. Still, I didn't want to destroy them outright. Not yet. I wanted them to walk into their own downfall, one careful step at a time. That's when I met Elena. She was a journalist working for a regional magazine that covered business development in rural communities. She reached out to me after seeing my company featured in an industry newsletter. "You seem to be doing something different," she said during our first meeting over coffee. "Most people build things for scale. You're building for purpose." I didn't expect it to go anywhere beyond a short feature about local innovation, but as we talked, her curiosity deepened. She asked about my family's history with the land, about my grandfather, about how I got into engineering. I hesitated to bring up the retreat, but when she mentioned she'd already been researching the new luxury development near Whitaker Lake, I realized fate had just handed me something valuable. "They've built over a groundwater source," I said carefully. "One that's protected under environmental zoning. And they're not supposed to be there." Her pen froze mid-sentence. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She didn't print it immediately. Instead, she started digging. Over the next few weeks, Elena uncovered a trail of discrepancies: construction permits issued under false claims, environmental clearances that were either missing or rushed, and a pattern of payments from the retreat to county officials that didn't quite line up. She was cautious, thorough, methodical. One night, she called me, her voice tight with excitement. "Peter, do you know how deep this goes?" "I have a guess," I said. "They've been rerouting part of the water system, your water system, to feed their so-called wellness spas. And the local board approved it under your grandfather's old company name. They forged authorization papers." I sat back in my chair, stunned but not surprised. Forgery. Of course. They'd already broken into my apartment, stolen deeds, and fabricated a narrative in court. Why not steal my name too? "Can you prove it?" I asked. "I can," she said. "But if I publish, it's going to be a firestorm. Are you ready for that?" I paused, thinking about Grandpa, about all the years of swallowing my anger. "Yeah," I said finally. "I've been ready for a long time." While she prepared her piece, I worked on my own front. Henderson and I began restructuring the legal ownership of everything under RW Resources LLC. We shifted the assets into a trust, one that I controlled exclusively. The new trust had clauses that would automatically trigger repossession if any of the land or resources were used commercially without a valid lease. That meant Chloe's retreat was now sitting on a ticking time bomb. I didn't stop there. I hired an independent environmental consultant, someone known for being brutally honest and unimpressed by corporate money. Her inspection confirmed what Elena had suspected. The retreat's drainage system was leaking contaminants into the water supply. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to violate environmental codes. The irony was delicious. Chloe had built her empire on sustainability and healing. Now, the very ground beneath her was turning against her because she'd poisoned it. I kept everything quiet, though. Henderson wanted to file immediately, but I told him to wait. "They're too proud to back down," I said. "Let them build higher. The fall will be cleaner." Meanwhile, Chloe continued her PR crusade. She hosted gala dinners at the retreat, invited influencers, and even filmed an interview for a national business channel. I watched it one night, half out of morbid curiosity. She sat there in a white suit, smiling into the camera, saying things like, "This retreat isn't about money. It's about honoring my grandfather's memory and reconnecting people with nature." When the interviewer asked about her family, she smiled even wider. "My parents have always supported me. My brother? He's doing his own thing. I think he's still finding his path." That line hit harder than I expected. Still finding his path. That's what Mom used to tell relatives when I was 25 and fixing engines out of a garage. To her, my worth had always been potential that never bloomed. I didn't realize it until later, but that line, her public dismissal, became the final push I needed. I spent the next few weeks refining my next move. Henderson drew up a series of quiet notices, formal demands for cessation of commercial activity on my land. We didn't deliver them yet. We were waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came in early spring, when the retreat announced its biggest event yet, the Whitaker Legacy Weekend, a luxury 3-day retreat celebrating family, roots, and resilience. It would feature wellness workshops, fine dining, and a keynote speech by Chloe herself. Tickets were $3,000 per guest and sold out in days. Elena called me the day after the announcement. "You know this is the perfect timing, right?" "Oh, I know," I said. Her article was already complete, an expose detailing the environmental violations, the false permits, and the illegal use of private property. But I asked her to hold it until the day of the event. She hesitated, but when I explained why, she understood. "Let them put on the show first," I said. "Then we pull the curtain." During those weeks leading up to it, I prepared everything: copies of the trust documents, environmental reports, injunction orders, and photographic proof. Henderson coordinated quietly with the county environmental office and a few journalists he trusted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to their cruelty. I was ahead of it. Still, I couldn't help but think about how strange it felt. Revenge, for all its fire, isn't loud. It's patient. It's methodical. It's built like a bridge, piece by piece, until one day the whole structure carries its own weight. The night before the Legacy Weekend, I drove out to the farm again. It was quiet except for the hum of generators. The cabins glowed softly under string lights, guests checking in, staff preparing decorations. From a distance, it almost looked beautiful. But I knew what it really was, a facade built on theft, on ego, on betrayal. I stood under the oak tree for a long time. The moonlight filtered through the branches, silvering the ground beneath my feet. I whispered, "Tomorrow, they'll finally see you, Grandpa. Not their version you." When I drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Everything was in motion. Elena had scheduled her article to go live at 9 a.m. sharp, just as Chloe would begin her speech. The environmental report would reach the county board an hour later, triggering an immediate inspection. And the cease and desist order, signed, sealed, and stamped, was sitting in Henderson's briefcase, ready to be hand-delivered during the event itself. It was all timed perfectly. I didn't plan to attend the retreat, but something in me wanted to see it, just once, to witness the moment the walls cracked. So I made a decision. The next morning, I'd walk right into their kingdom, quietly, calmly, like the ghost of the man they'd erased. And by the time I left, the empire they built on lies would be nothing but dust beneath the roots. The morning of the Legacy weekend felt impossibly ordinary. Blue sky, crisp air, string lights still drooping from the eaves like last night's confetti. I sat in my car about a half-mile down the lane and watched the place through the windshield for a long time. From a distance, it looked like the joyful scene Chloe wanted everyone to see. Couples laughing on the lawn, servers moving silently with trays, a harpist somewhere under an awning. Close up, it was the same set of rehearsed motions I'd seen on social media. The choreography of a story someone wanted you to believe. I breathed in, folded my hands in my lap, and felt the weirdest peace. My part of the plan had long since stopped being about feelings. It was about facts. And facts, when presented clearly, had a way of bending the world toward the truth. At 9 on the dot, Elena's piece went live. I didn't read it on my phone like a normal person would. I watched the live stream feed from the retreat instead. 1,000 people were logged in. Chloe stood on a small stage beneath a banner that read, "Whitaker Legacy Weekend," rooted in purpose. She was radiant, impossibly collected, and spoke about heritage, stewardship, and intentional living. The camera pulled back to show the audience, the tables, the branded tote bags with a minimalist oak logo. It was beautiful theater. Then Elena's headline scrolled across my screen. Whitaker Retreat built on disputed land. Allegations of forged permits and environmental violations surface. The article was clean and precise. No hyperbole, just documents, names, dates. It linked to scanned copies of permits, a contractor's unpaid invoices, and the environmental report showing contaminated runoff into the tributary that fed the spring. It quoted the county clerk about missing authorizations and included a short statement from Henderson indicating that an injunction request had been filed. The piece went viral within minutes, shared, screenshot, reposted, and the live stream feed at the retreat began to fill with rapid-fire comments. Is this true? Did she really forge permits? What about the water? Back at the site, Chloe's smile faltered. For the first time that morning, I saw the human beneath the polish, confusion, then an attempt at composure, then a flash of anger. She glanced toward the stage manager, who whispered something and then moved to check the feed on a side monitor. The murmurs in the crowd swelled. Phones came out. Guests who had paid thousands for a healing weekend were suddenly watching a scandal unfurl on their screens. A woman at a front table stood up and walked toward the stage as if to demand answers. Elena's article was only the start. 10 minutes later, the county environmental office released a short statement acknowledging that it had received a formal complaint and would dispatch inspectors immediately. An hour after that, a lawyer representing a group of contractors filed public complaints about unpaid work, attaching the same invoices Elena had uncovered. Social feeds went from admiration to suspicion. The retreat's hashtag tanked. I walked through the gate like a ghost. Staff eyed me with polite confusion, someone they recognized as the little brother who weirdly never left town. And I let them think whatever they liked. I didn't want attention. I wanted a moment, and then the facts to land where they would. When I stepped onto the lawn, I could feel the temperature shift. Conversation stalled. Eyes tracked me. Chloe saw me almost at the same time, and her face, for a flash, went entirely white. She lifted a hand to her earpiece and spoke into it in a low, hurried voice. I watched her try to be anchored by performance, the artifice faltering at the edges. Henderson arrived quietly, as he always did, calm, understated, the sort of man who radiates competence. He didn't need to do anything dramatic. He handed a folder to a county inspector who had just arrived, then to the retreat manager, and then to the retreat's lawyer. Elena sat in the front row like a soldier who had done her reconnaissance and returned with the maps. Cameras now swarmed the lawn, local stations, as well as a few national outlets that had picked up the story. The event organizer tried to keep the program going. That was their training. Don't give the rumor space to grow. But you can't keep a wound covered forever. Chloe mounted the stage for her keynote anyway, because of course she did. She cleared her throat and attempted to spin the narrative. "We are learning of allegations, and we're cooperating fully," she said, the political cadence practiced and precise. But the microphone crackled, the questions from the crowd got louder, and a contractor, whose name I later learned was Miguel, stood up in the back and shouted, "You owe my crew 2 months' pay." The man's voice cut through the canned music. The crowd turned. The hush became a wave. That was when the county inspector spoke into his radio. Within minutes, men in uniforms, environmental officers, not armed police, but official enough, walked across the grass to stand beside the oak. They did not ask for permission. They had authority. The head inspector scanned the site slowly, then called for a halt on the event pending immediate sampling. The band that had been tuning their instruments packed up without ceremony. Guests were asked politely but firmly to stay put as the county documented evidence. The retreat's lawyer began to mutter about injunction timelines, but Henderson's folder had already been entered into the official record. The moment the officers pinned a stop work notice to a visible support post near the stage, the atmosphere snapped from stage joy to raw anxiety. Guests stood, some looking indignant and demanding refunds, others visibly shaken. A man at a table turned to the person next to him and said, "But I brought my mother here for her birthday. What do we do?" 2 influencers who had been live streaming started screaming into their phones about being scammed, and the audio feed amplified the chaos. Chloe's carefully curated life started to fray at the seams in real time. What I remember most clearly is her eyes finding me from the stage. For months, I'd imagined the moment in different ways: confrontations, speeches, gloating. In person, it was quieter and more horrifying for her. She looked like a child caught after stealing a cookie, except the jar was the size of an estate, and the cookie crumbs were trailings of forged signatures and unpaid invoices. She mouthed something, but the microphone didn't pick it up. She tried to smile, and the smile broke somewhere in the muscles of her face. Mom appeared at her side, moving like someone reaching for a script that had been torn in half. Dad, being Dad, was gone. I later learned he'd retreated to the study where he'd always felt safe, where he could pretend nothing outside his immediate control had changed. It was the literal and spiritual distance he'd always preferred. Henderson stepped forward when the retreat's lawyer attempted to argue jurisdiction and legality. He spoke softly but firmly, presenting the maps, the trust paperwork, the environmental samples that Elena had facilitated, and the chain of custody documents. He didn't yell. There was no triumphant monologue. He laid out truths like building blocks. The county officials nodded, took his copies, and began the administrative process that would freeze operations and require immediate remediation. That's when the real machinery of accountability began to whir. Chloe's PR team tried to spin flash statements about misunderstandings and good faith and temporary halts to ensure safety. But the contractors circled like wolves who smelled blood. Miguel approached the stage again and, this time, addressed Chloe directly. "You told us you'd pay when you got the next round of sponsorship money," he said. "We paid men who trusted us. We'll sue if you don't. My kids have mouths too." The words landed heavy. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Money conversations never looked pretty in public. The live feed exploded. Comments scrolled so fast it was hard to read anything. Someone clipped a segment and uploaded it to a community forum where people began connecting pieces: an invoice here, a scan permit there, a screenshot of Chloe's earlier social posts about buying local juxtaposed with a contractor's claim of subpar materials paid by the retreat. People started calling out sponsors, asking them to distance themselves. Sponsors, spooked, issued tepid statements within the hour that they were reviewing their relationships. The retreat's booking engine, which had opened up a few weeks earlier for an expansion program, began to show cancellations. Through all of it, I stood near the oak. I could feel the weight of everything my grandfather had hidden down there and the irony that his quiet plan had not been about vengeance so much as clarity, leaving me the means to force truth into bright sunlight. I didn't yell. I didn't clap. I just watched. I watched Chloe, watched Mom trying to pull strings with an increasingly panicked staff, watched the legal and environmental wheels grinding into action. And then, right as Chloe opened her mouth to say something, an attempt at a heartfelt apology, perhaps, or an insistence that this was all a misunderstanding, the PA system cut, not because of theatrics, but because the power had been disconnected at the main breaker. Someone had tripped it to keep the equipment from interfering with the county's monitoring devices. Nightlight cameras continued to roll, but the stage lights died and the crowd was cast in natural daylight. Chloe froze, one hand raised like she might physically hold the words in. The microphone in front of her squeaked and went dead. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. The guests murmured, phones lifted again to capture the tableau. Mom's face tightened into a mask. The retreat's lawyer walked forward, mouth forming words that did not reach beyond the first syllable before a contractor started shouting accusations at him. The scene spiraled. Henderson walked up beside me and rested a hand lightly on my shoulder, just enough contact to say, "It's working." Elena was already on her phone, updating the newsroom with video clips. The county inspector called for photography, every click a digital hammer. A dozen messages buzzed across my own phone, notes of support, offers of legal help, calls from people who wanted to turn what happened into something that would stick. I answered none of them. I wanted to remain in that small window of stillness, the part of revenge where the mechanism you built actually functioned the way you expected it to. Then, as if the timeline needed an exclamation point, a police car rolled up the lane. Not because I'd called them, Henderson assured me we hadn't, but because someone had called 911 reporting a disturbance, and, with the news now national breaking on social feeds, the county had requested uniformed officers for crowd control and safety. The officers stepped from the cruiser with an efficient calm, scanning the crowd, verifying IDs, and issuing orders in low, clipped voices. Chloe's expression folded in on itself, caught between pride and panic. She looked at Dad, who still stayed inside, then at Mom, who was now urgently whispering into a phone. She looked at the oak, as if in some private plea, and then at me. Her gaze held a question. How did you have the nerve? And in it, something else, too. A dawning recognition that whatever had been built was not going to be easily salvaged. The sound of a distant helicopter, news chopper, probably, muffled from the sky, and the world narrowed into the present. Cameras, officers, contractors demanding payment, sponsors asking questions, an environmental team collecting samples, guests arguing about refunds, Chloe on a stage in the dark. The setup I'd orchestrated was collapsing around them, carefully and inevitably. I took a breath and, with a deliberate slowness I'd learned from Grandpa's workshop, walked toward the stage. People shifted to let me pass. When I reached the edge, someone in the crowd, an older man who had been a neighbor years back, grabbed my forearm and squeezed, eyes wet. "You did right by him," he said, and then he was gone into the throng. I climbed the few steps onto the wooden platform and stood beside Chloe. She turned her head to me, mouth opening to say something. Apology, accusation, anything. And then the mic crackled to life again for a single second. A thin, static-filled voice came through, not mine, not hers, but the voice of the county inspector. Under Section 12B, operations are ceased immediately. Any further activity on these grounds may be subject to civil and criminal enforcement. For a heartbeat, the world held, as if the air itself was measuring the moment. Then the live feeds multiplied and the crowd surged with questions. Chloe's face, painted for cameras and built for rehearsals, finally showed the rawness of someone whose script had been taken. She looked at me one last time, and there it was, an expression that had nothing to do with performance. It was fear. I opened my mouth. I had 100 possible things to say, short, sharp statements that would make headlines, long monologues that would take pleasure in detail. Instead, I said the one thing that felt most honest, and I didn't shout it. I simply said, "You were always welcome to the truth. You chose differently." Her lips quivered. She looked like she might speak, but at that moment a swarm of people pushed forward, reporters, guests, activists, and county staff, and the platform became a small island surrounded by noise. The helicopter's thump grew louder. Camera lights strobed. Someone yelled that the live stream had been clipped and was already reposted across platforms under new titles. Then, as authorities began to move the crowd and the retreat staff tried to salvage what they could, something shifted at the far edge of the property. A truck idled near a line of trailers. Men in suits I didn't recognize stepped out and were heading toward the farmhouse with an urgency that suggested they weren't here for PR. I saw Dad's outline at the farmhouse window. He had finally come outside, but by then the scene was a moving thing, alive with consequences. I didn't follow Dad's movement. Instead, I stayed on the stage, feeling absurdly calm. The oak tree behind me swayed, indifferent and ancient. The wind carried a faint scent of turned earth and cedar and something else. Maybe the faint bleach of sanitizer used to prepare a wellness corner. The irony made me smile despite everything. And then, in the middle of the noise, I heard a single voice call my name from the crowd. It was soft, shaky. Mom. She sounded different than she had in all the years of condescension. Small, human, asking for a lifeline she had no right to expect. She stood half-hidden by a cluster of guests and cameras, and for a second I considered walking over, making a scene of reconciliation, offering grace. The part of me that had once wanted nothing more than their approval stirred. But I didn't move. The helicopters circled, the county moved in to secure samples, and the legal teams circled like vultures and saints at once. Chloe's empire was collapsing with methodical cruelty and public shame. Contractors demanded bank numbers, sponsors issued statements, guests filed for refunds. Elena's article had ripped open a wound, and the wound was now being disinfected in public. At that precise, loud, chaotic moment, the moment when truth had begun to bend the world toward consequence, someone from the county inspection team approached me and handed me a small slip of paper. It was terse, typed. "We need you to come with us to the main office. There's a statement you should give about chain of custody and your role in ownership." The words were mundane and bureaucratic, but the implication was huge. My involvement had become official. I looked at the oak, at the ruined cabins, at the crowd, and then back to the slip. My breath fogged in the cold air. I folded the paper into my pocket and nodded. As I turned to follow the inspector, Chloe's voice rose in a wavering, barely coherent plea. "Peter, please, don't." The sentence broke into a sob. The crowd shifted again, and the cameras found Chloe's face, tears and mascara streaking down, a human breaking in real time on the stage she had built. I walked past her without looking back. There were still pieces to be put in place, legal filings to finalize, remediation plans to force, public statements to manage. There would be lawyers screaming and PR men spinning, and my parents pressing every lever they had to control the narrative. There would be nights of restless plotting, and there would be the quiet aftermath of what we'd done to each other. But for the first time in years, the scale had tipped enough that I could see a pathway, messy, legal, and painfully slow, away from the humiliation they'd laid on me. I felt lighter and more resolute than I had any right to feel. I reached the county vehicle and slid into the passenger seat. The inspector shut the door, glanced at me without malice, and said, "We'll need a statement, Mr. Whitaker. The public will want the truth." His voice was professional, not triumphant. I nodded and looked one last time at the oak through the rear window, its silhouette stark against the autumn sky. As the car pulled away, cameras still rolling, I thought of Grandpa's handwriting in that little envelope I'd found months ago, the quiet instruction to look beneath the roots. I thought of the patience it had taken to get to this hour, the small, bitter steps that had all accumulated into this moment. I felt the satisfaction of a slow plan working, but I also felt a weight settle on me, the knowledge that this was not the end. Because for all that had collapsed today, there were consequences that had yet to arrive, financial entanglements, battered relationships, and a family that would not surrender quietly. I knew very well that the most serious blows were often the ones delivered in courtrooms and in quiet conversations far from the cameras. We drove away from the property, the crowd shrinking in the distance, the oak left like a silent judge. My phone buzzed once, Elena's name flashing. She'd sent a single line. "It's live. You did it." I put the phone away and looked out the window as the retreat disappeared behind a stand of trees. The car moved down the lane, and for the first time in a long time, Something inside me uncoiled. But the moment the county vehicle turned onto the highway, my phone vibrated again, this time with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. The voice on the other end was low and clipped. "Mr. Whitaker, this is Agent Fisher with the state attorney's office. We need to talk. There's been a development regarding your grandfather's corporate filings. Can you come in?" It took months for the noise to settle, and when it did, the silence was even louder. The county's report came first, dry, factual, and devastating. It confirmed everything: illegal construction over protected waterways, forged environmental permits, unpaid labor, and unauthorized commercial activity on privately held mineral land. The words were clinical, but their impact was lethal. Within days, the Whitaker Heritage Retreat was shut down indefinitely. The morning after the ruling, I drove past the entrance. The banner was gone. The sign that once read, "Rooted in Purpose," lay half-buried in mud, flapping weakly in the wind. The cabins stood empty, their paint already fading under spring rain. Weeds had begun to crawl up the wooden stairs, nature reclaiming what greed had stolen. It felt poetic, quiet, brutal justice. But it was only the beginning. The lawsuits followed like vultures. Contractors sued for unpaid wages. Guests demanded refunds. Environmental agencies levied fines so steep they could have bankrupted a small corporation. Sponsors pulled out, each issuing their sterile public statements about values misalignment. And through it all, Chloe kept posting for as long as she could, trying to salvage the illusion. She uploaded teary videos about misunderstandings and bureaucratic sabotage, but every word made her look more desperate. People stopped believing her. Then they started mocking her. Memes, parodies, hashtags. Her name turned from luxury to liability overnight. Mom disappeared from social media entirely. I heard through neighbors that she stopped leaving the house. The woman who once loved dinner parties and public praise couldn't face a grocery store without whispers following her. Dad, ever the coward, spent his days meeting with lawyers who charged him thousands to tell him what he already knew. There was no way out. Their empire was gone. But even as I watched it crumble, part of me felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but exhaustion. The kind that goes bone deep after years of holding your breath. Grandpa used to say revenge was like carving wood. Too much pressure, and the whole thing splinters. I finally understood what he meant. Still, I couldn't walk away just yet. 2 weeks later, I was called to testify before the state attorney's office. Agent Fisher, the same one who'd called me the day of the retreat's collapse, met me in a stark conference room. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of my grandfather's corporate filings and several newer documents I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather was meticulous," Fisher said. "He structured everything legally, but we've discovered someone's been falsifying signatures on those filings for years. Someone tried to re-register his LLC under another name right after his death. I didn't even need to guess who. Can we prove who did it?" I asked. Fisher nodded. "We can. There's a digital paper trail, IP addresses, timestamps, payments for expedited processing. It all points to your sister." He explained that Chloe had attempted to quietly seize control of RW Resources LLC, my grandfather's old holding company, after his death. Her plan had been to absorb its assets under her retreat's parent organization. If she'd succeeded, she would have gained ownership of everything: land, mineral rights, and even residual profits from my grandfather's investments. The only thing that stopped her was Henderson's legal diligence. When Fisher finished, he leaned back in his chair. "The forgery alone is enough for felony charges," he said. "But it's your decision whether we pursue them." For a long time, I didn't answer. I stared at the folder, the neatly typed evidence of what my family had become. Pressing charges meant destroying any last trace of them. No more polite holidays, no more calls, no more pretending there was ever love in the first place. It would be permanent. But then I remembered the look on Chloe's face that day, the smirk, the entitlement, the complete absence of remorse. I remembered Mom's words. Sometimes, the better child needs more to do more. I looked up. "Do it," I said. "All of it." He nodded once. "We'll move forward." News of the charges broke within a week. Fraud, forgery, environmental misconduct, tax evasion. The headlines spread like wildfire. Chloe was arrested at her condo in front of cameras. Her mugshot, the same face that once sold wellness and luxury, became the symbol of greed's downfall. Mom tried to claim ignorance, but the investigation revealed she'd co-signed several fraudulent checks. Dad wasn't charged, but the IRS came for him anyway. By the end of the summer, everything they owned was gone, seized, sold, or liquidated to cover legal penalties. Their home went first. The cars followed. Even the family heirlooms, Mom's china, Dad's coin collection, were auctioned off. I didn't go to the sentencing hearing, but Henderson did. He told me afterward that Chloe cried the entire time, not from guilt, but disbelief. She kept asking why, he said quietly, as if it was happening to her, not because of her. Mom refused to speak. Dad, apparently, sat there staring straight ahead, jaw clenched, like a man who couldn't decide whether to be angry or ashamed. When the judge handed down the sentence, 2 years in prison for Chloe, probation and restitution for Mom, the courtroom fell silent. Henderson said the only sound was the echo of the gavel. I thought I'd feel joy, vindication, something cinematic. But when he told me, I just nodded. It wasn't happiness I felt, it was peace. A deep, quiet kind of peace, the kind that doesn't cheer or shout, just breathes. In the months that followed, I rebuilt the property the way it should have been. The retreat cabins were torn down under county supervision, and the land was restored to its natural state. The oak tree stood untouched, towering over the fields like an old sentinel. I kept the farmhouse too, but not as a shrine, as a workshop. Every Saturday, I drove out there, brewed coffee on the porch, and worked with my hands like Grandpa taught me. Sometimes I repaired old furniture. Sometimes I just sat beneath the tree with a notebook. The land was quiet again, honest again. One evening, near the end of autumn, I found a letter tucked behind a drawer in Grandpa's workbench. It was addressed simply, "For when the noise ends." The handwriting was shaky, written late in his life, but the words were unmistakably his. If you're reading this, Peter, then you already know what I always hoped you would. That integrity takes longer to build than money, but it lasts longer, too. I never wanted to punish your father or your sister. I just wanted to show you that truth doesn't need to shout to win. Let the land remind you of that. I folded the letter and sat there for a while, the sound of the wind threading through the branches. The sun dipped low, lighting the fields in gold. I realized then that revenge hadn't been the point. It was accountability. A reckoning that began long before I was even old enough to see it coming. Later, I placed the letter in a small frame and hung it by the door. Every time I walked into the farmhouse, it greeted me like a quiet compass. Months passed. My business flourished. I started teaching local students about sustainable design. Kids who reminded me of myself, hungry to build something real. The farmhouse became a community workspace. People came to learn carpentry, engineering, restoration. It wasn't about money. It was about legacy, the kind that doesn't fit in bank accounts. As for my parents, I never saw them again. They moved to another state after the house was sold, living in a small apartment near a strip mall. Henderson once told me Dad still refuses to say my name. Mom, apparently, sends letters sometimes, but I never open them. Chloe's release made headlines a year later, but the world had moved on. The wellness industry she'd thrived and had replaced her with a new face, a new name, a new lie. She tried to reach out once, a handwritten note left at my office. I read it standing by my desk, then tore it in half and threw it away. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about reopening doors. It's about closing them gently and walking away without bitterness. The last time I visited the farmhouse, the oak was shedding its leaves again. They fell in slow spirals, blanketing the earth. I placed my hand on the trunk, feeling the rough bark beneath my fingers. Somewhere deep below, the roots ran strong, unseen but unbreakable. That's when I understood what Grandpa had meant all along. The dollar wasn't the gift. The letter wasn't the treasure. The land wasn't even the point. It was the lesson. What's buried beneath the roots always outlives the ones who tried to cut it down. I looked out across the fields, at the horizon where the sun dipped low and the farmhouse lights glowed faintly through the trees. The air smelled like soil and pine and rain. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. My name's Caleb, I'm 32, and for most of my life, I've played the role of the responsible one. You know the type. The kid who never got into trouble, who always stayed quiet during arguments, who picked up after others without being asked. The one who didn't need much. And that's exactly how my parents liked it. They never said it out loud, but it became pretty obvious by the time I hit my 20s. My job wasn't to be cared for, it was to take care of everyone else. Especially my younger brother, Darren. Darren is 29 now, and growing up, he was everything I wasn't. Loud, reckless, charming in that way that made adults laugh off bad behavior like it was a phase. He scraped by in school, partied through college, and somehow always landed on his feet. Meanwhile, I worked part-time while studying engineering, skipped vacations to save money, and helped with house repairs so mom and dad wouldn't have to call someone. I thought I was earning their respect, maybe even their pride. But what I really was, I've come to realize, was convenient. The first sign that things weren't as equal as I thought came just after college. Darren had dropped out of a business program for the second time and was working some temp job at a warehouse. I had just landed my first full-time engineering position and was over the moon about it. I remember coming home that weekend with a bottle of champagne and my first paycheck stub, thinking maybe, just maybe, this time Dad would say he was proud of me. He barely looked up from the TV. Mom gave me a quick hug, then asked if I could cover Darren's car insurance that month because he was in between jobs again. I did it. Of course I did. Because that's what I'd always done. Fast forward a few years, and I'd bought a modest townhouse an hour outside the city. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Darren was still living at home, cycling through jobs and girlfriends, none of which ever lasted more than a few months. I'd started setting boundaries, saying no when they asked for help with his credit card debt, or when Mom hinted that I should invite him to live with me just until he gets on his feet. That's when things started to turn. They didn't argue with me directly. No yelling or guilt trips. Just silence. Cold, heavy silence. Calls went unanswered. Texts were suddenly seen, but not replied to. I'd visit for the holidays and feel like a guest in my own family. And Darren? He soaked it up. He'd make jokes about how I was the corporate robot, while he was the free spirit chasing dreams, and my parents would laugh along like he was some misunderstood genius. I kept my distance, built my own life. Until last year, when my grandfather passed away. He was the only one in the family who ever really saw me. He was a quiet man, but he always asked about my projects, sent me books about leadership and innovation, and told me to aim higher. I spent more time with him than anyone else in the family. We bonded over chess, classic sci-fi, and our shared love for restoring old watches. So when I got the call from the family lawyer, I assumed, naively, that I'd at least be part of the conversation about his estate. I wasn't. Turns out Grandpa had passed everything, his house, his antique collection, even his car, to my parents, trusting them to distribute it fairly. And they had decided to give it all to Darren. Their reason? He'll have a family someday. He'll need the stability. I sat there in stunned silence as they told me this, like it was the most logical thing in the world. Like it made perfect sense that I, the one who had been there for Grandpa, who had helped him when his health was declining, who had driven him to his checkups, got nothing. Not even the chess set we used to play on every Sunday. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded, said, "Thanks for letting me know," and left. That was the moment I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Just clarity. Like someone had wiped fog off a mirror and shown me what had been staring me in the face for years. But it didn't stop there. About 6 months later, I started getting texts from Mom. First, it was small stuff, asking if I could help out with their internet bill because Dad was between contracts. Then it was the electric bill. Then the property taxes on Grandpa's house. The same house they'd gifted to Darren, who had moved in with his new girlfriend and was already planning to remodel the garage into a recording studio. "You know how hard it is right now," Mom wrote. "You're doing so well. You should help." At first, I ignored the messages. Then I responded with polite no's. Then I stopped responding altogether. That's when the guilt trips began. My aunt called me one night to ask why I was punishing my parents. Darren left me a voicemail saying I'd changed, and that success had made me arrogant. And then, just last week, I got the text. The one that made me sit down, reread it 3 times, and take a very long, very deep breath. It was from Mom. Simple. Cold. No greeting. "Electric's past due. You better handle it." That was it. No please. No can you. Just an expectation, like paying their bills was a job I'd forgotten to clock in for. I stared at that message for a long time. The anger didn't come immediately. It was a slow burn. A low simmer in my gut that had been building for years, finally bubbling to the surface. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to be impulsive. I wanted to be clear. For the first time in my life, I wanted them to understand exactly who I was and who I wasn't anymore. And so I started writing a reply, not just to the text, but to everything. The years of being the fallback. The expectation that I would give without question while Darren was given without earning a thing. I thought about what I'd say, how I'd say it, and how this time, I wasn't going to walk away quietly. I haven't sent the message yet, but I will. Soon. The morning after that text, I sat at my kitchen table, still staring at it like it might disappear if I looked hard enough. Electric's past due. You better handle it. I read it over and over. Not even a question. Not even a can you please. Just a command. Like I was an employee whose paycheck they'd forgotten to sign for the past 3 decades. I didn't reply. Instead, I started thinking back through all the quiet little moments that had led here. How I'd been groomed to accept this treatment without protest. How every time I tried to draw a boundary, I was met with subtle punishment, withdrawn affection, sudden silence, backhanded comments from relatives that I think I'm too good now. I'd convinced myself for years that keeping the peace was noble, that maybe if I just gave a little more, tried a little harder, they'd treat me like a son and not a utility. But now I was done pretending, and the next few weeks only confirmed that I was making the right call. It started with a Facebook post. Darren had tagged our parents in a photo outside Grandpa's old house. The caption? New beginnings. Turning this place into the dream home for me and my future fam. Thanks Mom and Dad for believing in me. The comments were filled with congratulations, heart emojis, and people praising my parents for being so generous and supportive. Not one mention of the fact that I, their other son, had poured hundreds of hours into that house before Grandpa passed. That I'd fixed the leaky roof, retiled the bathroom, and repainted the entire downstairs after he fell and couldn't do it himself. I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I just stared at the screen for a while, feeling something twist in my chest. Like I was watching someone else live the life I'd worked for. A life handed to him, wrapped in ribbon, while I was being sent invoices for the lights in a house I hadn't stepped foot in since the funeral. Then came the phone call. I hadn't spoken to Dad in months, but one night, he called out of the blue. No small talk. No, how have you been? Just a deep sigh, and then, you know your mother's not doing well with all this stress, Caleb. I waited for him to continue, confused. All what stress? He scoffed like I was being difficult on purpose. The bills, the house upkeep. And now Darren's talking about starting a family soon. We thought you'd be more involved. I nearly dropped the phone. Involved? I'm not even invited, Dad. There was a long silence. Then he said something that snapped something in me clean in two. We didn't think you'd mind, Caleb. You don't need what Darren needs. He's going to have kids. A wife. You're, independent. That word. Independent. It used to feel like a compliment. Now it felt like a polite way of calling me disposable. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, I've got to go, and hung up. The next week, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was junk. No return address, just my name printed in bold letters. But inside was a neatly folded list of expenses, handwritten in my mother's familiar cursive. Internet, gas, electric, property tax. At the bottom, your share, $740. Please send before 15th. No note. No explanation. Just a bill. My hands trembled as I folded the paper back up. I could feel the old instinct kicking in. The voice in my head that told me to keep the peace. Just pay it. Don't make things harder. But another voice had started speaking too. One that asked, why are you financing their favoritism? And that voice was getting louder. I didn't pay the bill. Instead, I called my friend Jordan, an old college buddy who'd gone into estate law, and asked a question I'd never thought I'd say out loud. If someone gives away inheritance before probate, and there's no written will, is there anything that can be done? He paused. You're talking about your grandfather? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Well, he said slowly, if it was verbal and there's no paper trail, it's hard to dispute. But if they misrepresented the inheritance or used coercion, or if there's proof your grandfather's wishes were ignored, you might have a case. What? I didn't answer. I just thanked him and hung up. The next family event I got invited to was Darren's engagement party. I hadn't seen him or my parents since that phone call, and I was shocked they even bothered to include me. The invite came in the mail, gold foil lettering and a picture of Darren and his fiancée posing on the porch of Grandpa's house. The same porch I'd painted the summer after college while Darren was off on a last-minute cruise paid for by Mom's emergency savings. I wasn't planning to go, but then I thought about that chess set. The one Grandpa had promised me when I was 16, after I finally beat him in a full match. "You've earned it," he said, smiling. "Someday this will be yours." I never saw it again after he died. I checked the invitation one more time. No personal note. No message from Darren. Just a printed line that said, "Let's celebrate love and family." Family. Right. I marked the date on my calendar. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. But something had shifted. I was no longer trying to be included. I was planning my exit. And I wanted them to remember it. The day of Darren's engagement party arrived with the kind of heaviness that settles in your bones before you even get out of bed. I hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't called, hadn't given them any reason to expect me. But I went anyway. Not to celebrate, not to make peace, but because I needed to see, with my own eyes, just how far gone this family really was. The house looked almost unrecognizable. Grandpa's clean, weather-worn white siding was now some trendy charcoal gray. The old rose bushes were ripped out, replaced with a soulless rock garden. The porch, the one where we used to sit in silence watching the sun dip behind the hills, had been extended into a wide wraparound deck with twinkle lights and overpriced patio furniture. And right there on a custom wooden sign hanging beside the door, the future home of the Bell family. Darren's last name, not ours. I stepped through the door and was hit with a wave of laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. The air smelled of catered appetizers and designer candles. No trace of the old home that once held quiet afternoons and creaky floorboards. I wasn't greeted. No one even noticed I'd arrived at first. I stood by the door for a full minute before my aunt finally spotted me and came over with a forced smile. "Caleb, so glad you made it." I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. Mom was near the fireplace, chatting with some women I didn't recognize. She turned just enough to make eye contact with me, and then looked away, just like that, as if I were someone's awkward coworker who had shown up by accident. Dad eventually walked over and gave me a firm handshake, like we were business associates. "You're looking well," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Doing fine." He gave a curt nod and then excused himself to check on the food. I watched as Darren made his grand entrance from upstairs with his fiancée, Tessa, I think her name was, laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. The room practically erupted in applause. He soaked it up like a politician at a campaign rally, waving, giving finger guns, even winking at a few of the guests. When he finally saw me, his smile faltered just slightly. Then he walked over with that casual swagger I'd known since childhood. "Caleb, wow, wasn't sure you'd show up." "Got the invite," I said. "Yeah, well, no hard feelings about the house, right? I mean, Mom and Dad did what they thought was fair. I tried to tell them to include you more, but..." He trailed off with a shrug, like it was out of his hands. Like I should be thanking him for even mentioning me at all. Then he chuckled. "Hey, at least you don't have to worry about renovations, right? You're the free agent. No strings." I didn't respond. I just looked past him toward the display table near the kitchen. There, under a glass case, was something that stopped me cold. Grandpa's chess set. Polished. On display. Labeled like a museum piece. A tiny engraved plaque read, "From our family's legacy, now part of our new beginning." I felt something inside me crack. That set wasn't just sentimental. It was symbolic. It was mine. Not legally maybe, but spiritually. Grandpa had promised it to me. I remembered every piece, every smooth wooden bishop, the worn edges of the pawns. That set had seen me through adolescence. It had sat between us through conversations about life, ambition, self-worth. I'd never asked for anything else from Grandpa because I believed that set was enough, that it meant something. And now it was just a prop in Darren's showroom of success. I turned away before anyone could see the heat rising behind my eyes. I went out to the backyard to clear my head, but that was a mistake too. The backyard had been transformed into a full event space. White tents, fairy lights, a bar, even a hired photographer. And that's when I heard it. "We're thinking of asking Caleb to co-sign the mortgage," Tessa was saying, her voice soft but not soft enough. "Just until the new loan clears. Darren said he's good for it, but the bank wants more income on the application." I froze behind a pillar, listening. "Your mom said he'll do it," she added. "She said he always helps when she asks." My breath caught. They weren't just assuming I'd pay the bills. They were making plans to tie me financially to a house I didn't own, didn't live in, wasn't even welcome in. I stood there in stunned silence, my mind racing. A cosign mortgage? That wasn't help. That was a shackle. Then I heard Darren's voice from the other side of the tent. Caleb won't say no. He never does. He acts all cold sometimes, but deep down, he still wants their approval. He'll cave. They all laughed. That was it. The moment. The betrayal wasn't just that they'd taken the inheritance. It wasn't even the lies or the erasure of everything I'd done for the family. It was this plan to chain me, again, to their convenience. This belief that I was so desperate for crumbs of affection that I'd sabotage my own future just to stay in their orbit. I walked back inside and headed straight for the display case. I stared at the chess set one more time. The queen was in the wrong spot. They didn't even know how to set it up properly. I looked around at the house, at the people laughing, drinking, congratulating each other for building a future with my legacy, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just quiet, resolute clarity. This wasn't my family anymore, and I wasn't their safety net. Not anymore. And what I did next made sure they would never forget that. I left the party without saying goodbye. I didn't make a scene, didn't throw accusations, didn't scream or cry or flip a table like I used to fantasize about when I was younger and angrier. I just slipped out the side door and walked down the street until I reached my car. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you hear your own breath too loudly. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the dashboard, hands motionless on my thighs. The street lamps made long shadows across the windshield. Everything looked unreal, like I was watching my own life from outside my body. That chess set, that conversation about the mortgage, that look on Mom's face when she saw me and just turned away. I'd never felt more disposable, like I was a credit line with a pulse. Like my value was in what I could do, not who I was. That kind of realization doesn't come like a lightning strike. It's slower. A dull ache that builds over years until one day, you just can't carry it anymore. That night, I didn't go home. I drove. Nowhere in particular. Just kept the engine running and let the road carry me through the city, past late-night gas stations and empty parking lots and convenience stores still lit by flickering neon. My mind was spinning. Not with rage, but with questions. How did I let it get this far? How did I become the one who was left out of my own family's future? How did I become the one no one fought for? I ended up at a late-night diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of burnt coffee soaked into the walls. I sat at the counter and ordered pancakes I wasn't hungry for. The waitress didn't ask questions. She just kept refilling my cup like she knew I needed time. That's where the breakdown happened. Not a loud one. No sobbing or shouting. Just me, hunched over a plate of syrup-soaked pancakes, quietly letting tears fall into my coffee as the jukebox played some forgotten 80s ballad. It was grief. Grief for the family I thought I had. For the version of myself I'd killed off piece by piece to stay in their good graces. For the time I'd never get back. I didn't go into work the next day. I told my boss I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't a lie. I didn't shower, didn't shave. Just sat in my living room, staring at old photo albums I'd dug out of the closet. Pictures of me and Darren as kids. Birthday parties. Camping trips. The look on my face back then, so hopeful, so eager to please. I wanted to reach through the page and tell that kid, they don't love you the way you deserve to be loved. Stop trying so hard. That week, the text started again. Mom, can you call the bank? The water bill bounced. Then, we're adding Darren's name to Grandpa's property officially. Just a formality. We'll need your signature. Then finally, you're being cruel, Caleb. We're family. Stop punishing us because life gave Darren different needs. Different needs. I couldn't even bring myself to reply. Instead, I deleted the thread. Blocked her number. Then blocked Dad's. Then Darren's. I even blocked my aunt, who'd always taken their side in group chats, sending passive-aggressive Bible quotes and guilt-ridden messages about honoring your parents. I spent the next few days in silence. No calls. No texts. No demands. It was like walking through a post-storm forest. Broken trees everywhere, debris underfoot, but strangely peaceful. Still, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Cutting them off, even temporarily, was like pulling out a deeply embedded thorn. It hurt going in. It hurt more coming out. but I knew I had to do it if I ever wanted to walk without limping. I started writing in a journal again, something I hadn't done since college. Just page after page of unfiltered thoughts. Every memory, every moment that now made sense in hindsight. The times I fixed the fence while Darren played video games. The time I loaned Dad $2,000 to help with the house, only to find out it paid for Darren's motorcycle. The Thanksgiving when I brought a girlfriend and no one even remembered her name by dessert. I poured it all out. And in the quiet that followed, something new crept in. Resolve. Not vengeance. Not yet. But clarity. Direction. I wasn't just cutting ties. I was rebuilding my foundation. I called my accountant. Asked him to run a full audit on anything my name was attached to. Family property, joint accounts, co-signed loans from years ago. I wanted everything documented. Then I made an appointment with a financial advisor to explore options for moving assets, restructuring savings, and protecting my credit. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a big, satisfying showdown. It was small, quiet steps. I started going for early morning walks again, something I used to love before life got too busy. I cleared out old clothes, rearranged my living room, threw away things that no longer sparked anything in me. It felt symbolic, even if it was small. I was creating space, for peace, for breath, for the person I might have been if I hadn't spent decades playing someone else's supporting role. Then one morning, I checked my email and saw it. A message from a law firm. Subject, Transfer of property and financial responsibility. I opened it, heart pounding. Inside was a PDF, a document that listed my name as a co-owner of Grandpa's house. Not legal owner, but financially responsible party. It had been filed 3 months ago. No one had told me. No one had asked. And now, the bank considered me equally liable for any debts attached to the house, repairs, property tax, mortgage refinance fees. They had signed me into their future. Without permission. Without warning. I stared at the document for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Grandpa's old lawyer. I still had his business card. I kept it in a drawer, tucked inside a watch Grandpa had given me for my college graduation. A watch Darren once joked looked cheap. The lawyer answered after the second ring. Mr. Langley? I said, this is Caleb. Caleb Warren. I was Lewis Warren's grandson. There was a pause. Then a warm, familiar voice replied, I remember you, son. Your grandfather was proud of you. How can I help? I took a breath, and I told him everything. Mr. Langley didn't interrupt. Not once. I told him about the house, the inheritance, the mounting bills, and the way my parents and Darren had signed my name onto financial documents without my knowledge or consent. I even told him about the chess set, though I tried to pretend like that wasn't the part that still kept me up at night. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Caleb, I don't usually speak ill of clients, but your grandfather would be ashamed of how they've treated you. He trusted them to handle things honorably. But if they forged your signature or misrepresented your financial obligations, you may have more leverage than you think. That was the first moment in weeks, maybe months, where I felt the tide begin to turn. He offered to meet in person and go over everything I had. Bank statements, texts, emails, that PDF from the lawyer. I dug through years of digital dust, pulling out every receipt, every Venmo transfer for Darren's debts, every old message where my mom thanked me for covering bills I now realized were part of a larger pattern. It was like assembling a puzzle I never knew I'd been building. Mr. Langley got to work immediately. He helped me draft a legal notice requesting removal of my name from the property's financial obligations, citing lack of consent and misrepresentation. He also flagged the mortgage application that Tessa had mentioned at the engagement party and confirmed they had tried to add me as a co-signer, but it had been declined because they lacked a signed document from me. I wasn't just cutting them off anymore. I was protecting myself. Meanwhile, something else started happening. With all the energy I used to pour into my family's drama, I suddenly had time, space, to focus on things that actually mattered. I started showing up to work sharper, more alert. My manager noticed. I was offered a project lead position for a high-profile infrastructure redesign in the city, something I would have never taken on if I were still playing damage control back home. I accepted. Then I did something I'd never done before. I booked a vacation. A real one. 2 weeks in Lisbon. Alone. It wasn't just to get away. It was a declaration that my time, my peace, my life was mine again. On that trip, something shifted in me. I journaled daily, walked the hills with no schedule, sat at cafes without checking my phone. There were no emergencies to fix, no family drama pulling me back in. Just me, a city I didn't know, and the sound of my own voice finally getting a chance to speak uninterrupted. And I started to hear it clearly. I wasn't broken. I wasn't cold. I wasn't the selfish one. I was free. When I came back, I found a letter waiting at my door. Certified. From my parents' lawyer. They were surprised by the legal notice. They felt betrayed. Claimed they had only ever tried to give Darren a chance at a real life. That they assumed I would understand, given how well I was doing. But the final paragraph was the kicker. They asked me to reconsider, to undo the paperwork, to not make this public. The implication was clear. They were scared that I might tell people what they'd done, that the mask they wore in public, that of a generous, close-knit, traditional family, might finally crack. That's when I knew I had the upper hand. Because for the first time, they needed me, and I didn't need them at all. I wrote back a single sentence. All further communication can go through my attorney. A week later, Mr. Langley called with news. My name had been formally removed from all legal responsibility regarding the property. They'd backed off. Quietly. Begrudgingly. But completely. It felt like a final key turning in a lock I hadn't realized I'd been trapped behind. Then, 2 months after that, I got an invitation in the mail. Not from my family. From a local nonprofit. One I'd once donated to on a whim years ago. They were asking me to be a guest speaker on a panel about financial independence, setting boundaries, and recovering from toxic family dynamics. Apparently, I'd shared a personal note with them back then in a donation message, and someone had kept it. They wanted me to tell my story. I almost declined. But something told me to go. Standing on that stage, I told a room full of strangers about a chess set, a forged document, and the long, painful road of learning to stop begging people to treat me with dignity. I watched faces nod, eyes widen, and shoulders ease as they saw parts of themselves in my story. Afterward, someone came up to me, a woman in her 40s, teary-eyed, and whispered, "Thank you." I thought I was the only one. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was helping. And as I walked home that night, under a sky free of clouds or expectations, I realized something important. I hadn't lost a family. I had outgrown one. And the best part? I was just getting started. About a month after the nonprofit event, I got an email from someone unexpected. It was from an old friend of my grandfather's, Mr. Reinhardt, a historian and antiques appraiser who used to come over sometimes when I was a kid. He'd sit with Grandpa in the sunroom, sipping coffee and talking about the provenance of old war medals, vintage clocks, and obscure board games. I hadn't seen him since I was a teenager, but the email was warm, direct, and surprising. He wrote, "Caleb, I happened to see you speak at the panel a few weeks back. You've grown into a man your grandfather would have been immensely proud of. I wanted to reach out because something's come to my attention that you may not be aware of, something concerning your grandfather's belongings. Would you be willing to meet?" That last sentence lit a spark in me. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, the kind where you can still hear the clink of ceramic mugs and the soft hum of conversation. Mr. Reinhardt was older now, slower, with deeper lines etched into his face, but his eyes were sharp and his memory sharper. We sat down, and he wasted no time. "Your grandfather had a will," he said. I froze. I thought he left everything to my parents. He shook his head. He had a will. One he wrote himself, about 8 months before he passed. I helped him draft it, in fact. He wanted everything to be clear. Most of his personal belongings were to go to you, including that chess set. My stomach dropped. But the will was never filed. Your parents insisted there wasn't one. He nodded gravely. I was surprised when I heard they claimed there was no documentation. I assumed they had changed plans, or perhaps your grandfather never finalized it. But then I found this. He pulled a slim envelope from his coat pocket, worn but sealed with wax. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, Grandpa's. To be opened by Caleb Warren upon my death. I took the envelope with trembling fingers, barely able to breathe. Inside was a single page. "Caleb, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong, and this letter never made it to you the way I intended. I want you to know something, son. You were always the one I believed in. The one who showed up. The one who earned every ounce of my respect. I asked your parents to distribute things fairly, thinking they'd honor my wishes. But just in case they didn't, I wanted to put this in writing. The chess set is yours. So are my watch collection, my military memorabilia, and the safety deposit box at Hanover Bank. Box 442. Everything in that box is yours by right, not charity. I hope you never have to use this as proof. But if you do, don't be afraid to fight for what's already yours. Grandpa, I read the letter 3 times before I looked up. Do you know what's in the box? I asked. Mr. Reinhardt smiled faintly. Only your grandfather knew for sure. But I can tell you this. He once told me that legacy isn't just about money or things. It's about making sure the right people carry the torch. That same afternoon, I went to Hanover Bank. It took some verification and a couple of hours, but eventually, a bank manager led me into a quiet back room with a vault door. I signed a release, showed my ID, and was handed a small iron key. Box 442 was heavy. Inside, I found a certified copy of the original will, signed and dated, an insurance appraisal for the chess set, and several antique watches, totaling over $80,000. A handwritten inventory of Grandpa's military medals and antique tools, each with a note about its history. And tucked beneath it all, a flash drive. I took it home and plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained several documents, scans of receipts, letters, property transfers, and one folder labeled Darren. Inside were screenshots and PDFs, text from my mother discussing keeping Caleb in the dark, a copy of a forged signature on a property reassignment form, and even a voice memo, recorded by Grandpa himself, where he said, clearly and calmly, "If this message is heard by anyone but Caleb, then you've taken what was never yours. And I hope he finds this before the damage is irreversible." I sat there in stunned silence. Everything I'd suspected was true. But this wasn't just proof. This was power. The kind of power that could flip the entire narrative. Legally, ethically, socially. I could expose them, not just to our family and neighbors, but in court if I wanted to. I had the original will, the voice recordings, the financial appraisals, even hard evidence of forgery. I made copies, saved everything to an encrypted cloud drive, forwarded key files to Mr. Langley, who nearly dropped the phone when I told him. This, he said, changes everything. But I wasn't in a rush, because now, for the first time, I was playing chess with a full board in front of me. They thought I was out of moves, but I still had my queen. And the moment to strike was coming soon. I just had to decide how public I wanted the fall to be. I waited exactly 11 days. Not because I was unsure. Not because I had doubts. I waited because timing, like in chess, is everything. And if my family had taught me anything, it's that people who rely on your silence get nervous when it stretches just long enough. They start wondering if you're building something. And I was. The morning of the 12th day, I called Mr. Langley. "I'm ready," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. We'd spent the last week carefully preparing every legal thread we'd need. The original will had been submitted to the probate court as a previously undisclosed document. Langley filed a petition for formal probate, backed by the will, the notarized letter Grandpa left, and the voice recording. That alone would have been enough to shake the ground beneath them. But that wasn't the move. That was just the setup. The real move, the check, was what I sent to the rest of the family a day later. An envelope, neatly addressed, certified. One copy to my parents, one to Darren, and a digital version to my aunt, just in case. Inside was a letter, polite, firm, written like someone who wasn't asking, but informing. To whom it may concern. As you are likely now aware, a certified and signed copy of Lewis Warren's original will has been located and filed with the probate court. In accordance with his final wishes, several personal assets currently in your possession, including but not limited to the vintage chess set, antique watches, and military memorabilia, have been rightfully and legally designated to me. Furthermore, due to your unauthorized attempt to assign financial responsibility to me without my consent, as well as the documented evidence of forged signatures and misrepresentation of estate-related matters, I have initiated a formal claim of fraud, currently under review by the appropriate parties. At this time, I am offering a resolution. Return all assets named in the original will, cease any further financial contact with me, and acknowledge the updated probate documentation in writing within 7 business days. If these conditions are met, I will refrain from pursuing charges of forgery and public disclosure of the events leading up to this filing. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal escalation and the public release of the recorded materials in my possession. Sincerely, Caleb Warren. I didn't include threats. I didn't need to. The implication was enough. The following days were quiet. Too quiet. Then, on day 6, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery man standing beside a wheeled dolly with 2 wooden crates and a smaller, velvet-lined case. No note, just a signature form and a label. Returned to rightful owner. Inside was everything. The chest set, untouched, still in its display box. The watches, cleaned, polished, arranged in the same order Grandpa always kept them. And the medals, each pinned to a velvet board, with a copy of Grandpa's old handwritten notes tucked behind them. I stared at them for a long time. Not out of joy, not out of triumph, but because I realized this was the first time in years I had something from my family that wasn't laced with a demand. The next morning, Mr. Langley called. They complied, he said. The court has acknowledged the will, and your claim has been upheld. You're now the legal executor of your grandfather's estate. Executor? I asked. He chuckled. You're in charge, Caleb, of everything that's left. And that's when I made the final move. I went back to Grandpa's house. Not alone. I brought a real estate agent, an appraiser, and a photographer. The house wasn't just part of Darren's future anymore. It was part of my past. A past I was finally ready to let go of. The moment the documents cleared, I listed it for sale. Full public listing. Photos, history, even an open house. Within 3 weeks, it sold, above asking price. Darren found out from the sign out front. Apparently, my parents had quietly transferred the title to him months ago, but it wasn't legal. Not anymore. Grandpa's will overrode everything. They'd given him a house they had no right to. And now it was gone. I didn't take the money and splurge. I used it to start something my grandfather would have been proud of, a foundation in his name. A quiet scholarship fund for students in engineering and history, with a focus on those from neglected backgrounds. People like me, who'd spent their lives giving more than they received. Word got around. People started whispering. At church, at family functions, even online. Neighbors noticed the for sale sign vanish and a scholarship pop up in the local news the next month. And though I never named names, the paper trail was clean enough for anyone curious to find out what had really happened. My aunt reached out once. A short email. I don't know what's gotten into you. You used to be so kind. I didn't reply, because kindness doesn't mean compliance. And forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. They wanted to write me out of my own story. But now I held the pen, and they would never hold it again. The fallout didn't come all at once. It was slow, like frost creeping across a window, quiet, inevitable, and deeply revealing. The first to react was Darren. He showed up at my office. Not my home. He knew better than that. But my workplace. Security called up, confused, saying a man claiming to be my brother was demanding to speak with me. I stepped into the lobby just to look him in the eye. He hadn't dressed for a confrontation. He looked tired, unshaven, a shadow of the man who once posed on Grandpa's porch like he'd conquered something. You sold my house, he hissed the moment he saw me. Grandpa's house, I corrected calm. He laughed bitterly. You think you're some kind of hero now? What? Because you made a scholarship and sent back the bills. I tilted my head slightly. I never sent anything back. I just stopped playing your game. You ruined everything, he snapped. Tessa left. She didn't want to raise a kid with me on borrowed land. You took everything. Over what? A chess set. I didn't rise to it. You didn't lose a house, Darren. You lost access. And that's all you ever really cared about. His face twisted like he wanted to say something more, but I didn't give him the chance. I nodded to security. We're done here. They escorted him out. That was the last time I saw him. Word of the will, and what it revealed, spread quietly, but thoroughly. My parents tried to spin it, of course. Claimed I'd misunderstood things, that Grandpa hadn't been in his right mind when he wrote that letter. But once the forgery came up in court records, people began stepping back. Neighbors who once praised their family values stopped waving. Church members asked quiet questions they couldn't answer. Even my aunt, ever the voice of guilt, disappeared from my inbox. No more Bible verses. No more digs about honoring thy father and mother. Because you can't shame someone who no longer needs your approval. Financially, they took a hit. The mortgage Darren had hoped to refinance fell back onto their shoulders. With Darren out of the picture and no more bailout money from me, they began slipping. Late payments, calls from creditors, whispers of a downsized car, and a frozen credit card. I didn't cheer for their downfall, but I didn't save them either. Because the truth is, they'd never fallen from grace. They'd just run out of ways to hide what was always underneath. I kept building. The foundation grew. We funded our first 3 scholarships within the year. I started mentoring a student named Elijah, quiet, focused, the kind of kid who reminded me a little too much of myself at 17. We met twice a month, mostly to talk about goals and balance. But one day he asked me something that caught me off guard. How do you stay so calm when people try to walk all over you? I smiled at that, because for years I didn't. I was just quiet, and silence isn't the same as peace. So I told him the truth. You stay calm, I said, when you know how the game ends. He didn't get it right away. He would someday. Weeks later, I unpacked the chess set for the first time since getting it back. I laid out the pieces slowly, one by one. Felt the weight of the king in my palm, the groove where Grandpa's thumb used to rest. And then, without realizing, I whispered something aloud to the empty room. Checkmate. And I finally felt it. That I'd won.